I retired and bought a beautiful, quiet lake house to finally enjoy the peace I earned. Then my son-in-law stomped through my front door, dragging his parents behind him, and declared they were moving in. I didn't argue. I didn't scream. I just smiled and got my cameras ready. His mother sneered that they needed to make this arrangement permanent. They truly thought I was just a clueless old man they could walk all over. They never imagined what I had planned for them. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart people who underestimated your worth. My name is DeAndre Sullivan. I am 69 years old, and until that Tuesday afternoon, I thought my biggest problem was figuring out which fishing lure to use. I was sitting on my porch enjoying the afternoon breeze when the harsh screech of Audi tires tearing up my gravel driveway shattered the silence. I watched as the doors flew open. Brad, my daughter Aaliyah's husband, marched up the steps without so much as a knock. Right behind him were his parents Mitchell and Brenda Covington. Brad kicked the front door wide open and marched right into my living room. He was dragging 3 massive, heavy designer suitcases behind him. Without even looking at me, he hoisted those filthy wheels over the threshold and dumped all 3 suitcases right onto my antique Persian rug. The heavy thud echoed through the house. I stood up from my chair and walked inside, watching them invade my sanctuary. No hello, no asking for permission, just an arrogant parade of entitlement walking straight into my home as if they completely owned the entire place already. Brad finally turned around and crossed his arms over his chest. He puffed himself up, looking around my spacious living room with a deeply arrogant smirk. DeAndre, my parents are moving in here permanently, he announced. His tone was not a request. It was an absolute command. He waved a hand dismissively toward Mitchell and Brenda, who were already making themselves comfortable on my genuine leather sofa. Their house is currently under major renovation. Brad continued speaking to me as if I were a slow child. It is going to take several months, maybe even longer. Naturally, they need a comfortable place to stay. You have this massive lake house all to yourself, and honestly, you do not need all this space just for one person. It is entirely wasteful. Mitchell nodded slowly, adjusting his expensive golf shirt, acting as if he had just been granted the keys to a luxury resort. Meanwhile, Brenda was already prowling around my living room, inspecting my belongings with a look of pure disgust on her face. She ran her manicured fingers over the edge of my wooden mantel and scoffed loudly. "This decor is incredibly outdated," she said, her voice dripping with extreme condescension. She pointed a sharp, accusing finger at my prized vintage fishing gear mounted beautifully on the far wall. "And that awful fishing equipment simply has to go. It makes the whole room smell like a dirty swamp. We cannot possibly entertain any of our respectable guests with all this hideous junk hanging around. It is completely lacking in taste and refinement." Brad chimed in right after her, chuckling as if my home was some sort of pathetic joke. "My mom is right, DeAndre. We will need to clear out some of this old junk so my parents can actually feel comfortable living here. You can easily box up your little fishing poles and move them down to the basement where they belong. You really should be grateful we are here to bring some life into this empty, depressing place. You need company anyway." I stood near the kitchen island, quietly watching these 3 entitled people tear apart the sanctuary I had worked so hard to build. Brenda loudly declared that my favorite reading chair was a total eyesore, and insisted they would need to hire movers to bring in their own superior furniture by the end of the week. She paced the floor, muttering about hiring a professional interior decorator. Mitchell agreed, mentioning how the entire aesthetic failed to meet their high standards. They treated me like a hired caretaker instead of the rightful homeowner. Their sheer audacity was absolutely staggering, yet they remained completely oblivious to cold reality. I did not yell or cause a scene. I did not raise my voice or throw them out into the street. Instead, I turned around, walked slowly into my custom kitchen, and grabbed my favorite ceramic mug from the cabinet. I poured myself a fresh cup of hot black coffee, letting the deep, dark liquid fill the cup while the rich, earthy aroma calmed my racing thoughts. As I took a slow, deliberate sip, I watched them from across the granite counter. They genuinely believed they held all the power in this room. They saw a quiet, retired African-American man in a faded flannel shirt and automatically assumed I was a weak, defenseless target they could easily exploit. What Brad and his arrogant parents did not know was that I possessed a massive hidden advantage. I already knew the absolute truth about their sudden housing crisis. Their grand, prestigious estate was not undergoing any sort of luxury renovation. The hidden reality was far more pathetic. I knew for an absolute, undeniable fact that their sprawling property had been aggressively foreclosed on by the bank just 2 weeks ago. They were completely bankrupt, drowning in severe financial ruin and trying desperately to maintain their fake high society facade. My wealth manager, Eris Thorne, had sent me their public foreclosure documents days earlier. They were homeless, penniless, and absolutely desperate for a place to crash. Yet here they were marching into my property with their noses turned up, demanding the master suite and insulting my lifestyle. They wanted to play a very dangerous game of deception, entitlement, and manipulation within my own four walls. Taking another slow sip of my hot coffee, I silently decided I would gladly let them play their incredibly foolish game, but I would control the board. I placed my coffee mug down on the counter and walked back into the living room. I offered them a warm, highly convincing smile. "Of course you are all welcome to stay here," I told them politely. "Please make yourselves completely at home in the master suite." Brad immediately turned to his mother and gave her a wide, victorious smirk. He truly believed he had just successfully bullied a helpless old man into submission. Brenda smiled back, looking extremely satisfied as she began dictating which of my remaining furniture pieces would need to be thrown away by tomorrow morning. "Excuse me for a brief moment," I murmured, turning my back on their arrogant celebration. I stepped out onto the breezy back porch and pulled my cell phone from my pocket. I quickly dialed a highly trusted private security contractor. We certainly had some very urgent work to do right now. By the morning of day 2, the invasion was fully underway. I woke up at 6, ready to enjoy the sunrise over the lake, but the harsh sound of metal clattering into a plastic garbage bin interrupted the peace. I walked out to the back patio and saw Brenda standing over my heavy-duty trash can. She was aggressively tossing out items from a worn wooden crate. My heart slammed against my ribs. That crate belonged to my late wife. It held her beloved hand, trowels, her vintage pruning shears, and the custom leather gardening gloves she used every single spring. Brenda grabbed the leather gloves, holding them by 2 fingers, with an expression of absolute disgust, ready to drop them into the garbage alongside half-eaten takeout. I moved faster than a man my age should ever be able to move. I stepped right behind her, my chest inches from her back, and slammed my hand down on the rim of the trash can, slamming the lid shut right before she could drop the gloves. The loud bang made her jump and shriek in sheer terror. She spun around, her eyes wide with sudden panic as she realized how closely I had boxed her in. My posture was towering, perfectly rigid, blocking any path she had to retreat. I did not yell. I did not raise my voice a single decibel. Instead, I gave her a chilling, overly polite smile that did not reach my eyes. I gently but firmly pulled my wife's gloves out of her trembling hand. "I think we will keep these right where they belong, Brenda," I whispered, my tone dropping to a dead, quiet calm. "I strongly suggest you ask me first before touching anything else ever again in my own home today onward." Less than an hour later, Brad marched into the kitchen, his face flushed with unearned authority. He had clearly heard about the incident on the patio. He crossed his arms, looking me up and down with a condescending scowl that made my blood boil. "DeAndre, we need to have a serious talk about the living arrangements here," he demanded, speaking loudly as if I were hard of hearing. "My parents are highly respectable people. They are accustomed to a certain standard of living, and putting them in the guest room is completely unacceptable. Out of simple respect for your elders and for my family, I think you should pack up your things and move down to the basement. You can easily give Mitchell and Brenda the master suite. It is the only appropriate thing to do." He stood there, puffing out his chest, completely expecting a massive argument. He wanted me to fight back. He wanted to assert his dominance and prove that he was the new king of my property. I did not give him the satisfaction of a screaming match. I looked at him, my expression completely blank, masking the cold calculation turning in my mind. "You know what, Brad?" I replied smoothly. "That sounds like a perfectly reasonable idea. The basement is nice and quiet anyway." The look of utter shock on his face was absolutely priceless. His jaw went slack for a brief second before he recovered his arrogant smirk. "Good," he muttered, clearly confused by my total compliance. "Make sure your things are cleared out before noon." Without another word, I walked straight into my master bedroom. I grabbed 2 large duffel bags and began throwing my clothes, toiletries, and personal items inside. I moved with deliberate and highly purposeful speed, never once showing even a single tiny hint of any negative anger or visible frustration to them. Mitchell and Brenda watched me from the hallway, whispering to each other with victorious smiles. They truly thought they had broken my spirit. I dragged my heavy bags down the wooden stairs to the basement, leaving the luxurious master suite to the true parasites. By willingly and quietly surrendering my beautiful bedroom, I was lulling them into a false sense of absolute security. They thought I was a submissive old man who had accepted defeat. They had absolutely no idea that handing over the entire main floor was a crucial and highly calculated tactical maneuver in my ultimate strategy. It gave me the perfect excuse to stay out of their way while I meticulously laid the groundwork for their total and complete destruction. The very next morning, a professional security crew pulled into my driveway. I had requested expedited service, paying a premium to guarantee swift installation. I greeted the technicians at the door, purposefully putting on the act of a frail, paranoid old man. I hunched my shoulders slightly, rubbed my hands together, and spoke in a shaky, overly cautious voice. "Gentlemen," I murmured, pointing nervously toward the lake. "I have been hearing strange noises outside at night, and I am terrified of burglars breaking in. I need you to install hidden 4K audio-visual cameras in every single common area of this house so I can finally feel completely safe." Brad, who was lounging lazily on my sofa, snorted loudly. He walked over holding a protein shake and shook his head in pure disdain. He looked directly at the lead technician and rolled his eyes. "Do not mind the old guy," Brad scoffed, waving his hand at me like I was a pesky insect. "He is getting extremely senile and entirely paranoid in his old age. You really think some invisible lake bandits are coming to steal your dusty fishing rods, DeAndre? That is absolutely pathetic. You really should just save your money. Besides, you have my parents and me living here now to protect you. What else could you possibly need?" The technicians remained perfectly professional, ignoring Brad's obnoxious remarks as they began drilling small holes and embedding the microscopic lenses into the crown molding and light fixtures. I kept my head down, pretending to look deeply ashamed by Brad's cruel public mockery, but internally I was grinning from ear to ear. I was handing them the very rope they would inevitably use to slowly hang themselves. Once the crew finished, the trap was officially set and fully operational. That night, the heavy grandfather clock struck midnight. I sat completely alone in the dark basement, the cool air wrapping around my shoulders. I reached over and picked up my iPad, the sleek glass glowing brightly in the pitch-black room. With a simple tap of my finger, I opened the brand-new security application. I clicked directly onto the main living room feed. The ultra-high-definition camera instantly revealed the 3 invaders gathered around my expensive mahogany coffee table. Brad, Mitchell, and Brenda were leaning incredibly close to one another, engaged in a highly secretive, whispered meeting. They thought they were perfectly safe in the dead of night, shielded by the quiet isolation of the lake house. They were entirely wrong. I turned up the volume on my tablet, listening closely as their darkest, most twisted and malicious intentions finally began to pour out into the open air. Through the crisp, high-definition audio of my newly installed security system, every single whisper in the living room echoed clearly into my basement sanctuary. I watched Mitchell stroll over to my private liquor cabinet, casually pop the cork on my most expensive bottle of top-shelf single malt scotch, and pour himself a generous double. He took a long, arrogant sip, savoring the stolen luxury, before turning back to his wife and son. "Listen to me closely," Brad Mitchell murmured, his voice dripping with venomous greed as he swirled the amber liquid in his glass. "This is the perfect setup for us. We just need to play the long game. We tolerate this old black man for a few more months while carefully documenting every single mistake he makes. We tell everyone he is losing his mind. We hide his keys, move his belongings around, and convince him his memory is entirely gone." Brenda giggled softly, nodding in enthusiastic agreement as she leaned back against my custom upholstery. "Once we establish a solid pattern of severe mental decline," Mitchell continued, staring directly at his son, "we bring in our own lawyer. We claim he is completely unfit to care for himself or manage his own finances. We apply for full legal guardianship. As soon as the court grants us control over his estate, we transfer the deed of this magnificent lake house directly into our names. We can sell it or keep it for our permanent retirement. These uneducated people have absolutely no idea how the legal system actually works. We will take everything he owns right out from under his nose, and he will never even realize what hit him until he is rotting away in some cheap nursing home facility, completely broken and permanently forgotten by everyone." Brad threw his head back and laughed loudly, a cruel, heartless sound that echoed directly through my headphones. He reached over, snatching the crystal bottle of scotch from his father to pour himself a drink. "You guys honestly worry way too much. Brad smirked, crossing his legs and resting his expensive shoes directly onto my pristine coffee table. I already have everything completely under control on my end. You just focus on getting the deed to this house because I have already taken care of your immediate bankruptcy fines. Brenda sat up quickly, her eyes wide with desperate excitement. You paid those bank fines, Brad. How on earth did you manage that? We owed over $150,000 to those ruthless collectors. Brad took a sip of the stolen liquor and grinned like a proud, cunning predator. I simply leveraged my brilliant, hardworking, and completely oblivious wife, he stated proudly. Aaliyah works ridiculous 80-hour shifts at the hospital every single week, saving lives and bringing home massive paychecks. She is so exhausted when she walks through the front door that she never even glances at our financial statements. She totally trusts me to manage all our banking, so I secretly maxed out every single one of her personal credit lines. I took out massive personal loans under her name and completely drained her high-yield savings accounts. She has absolutely zero idea that she is currently drowning in exactly $150,000 of toxic high-interest debt. She essentially bailed you guys out without even knowing she did it. Mitchell laughed heartily, raising his glass high into the air to toast his deceitful son. That is my boy, he cheered proudly. Always utilizing the resources available to you. She is just a stupid cash cow anyway. As long as you keep playing the perfect loving husband, she will keep working those endless hospital shifts to pay off our debts. Brad nodded, his expression completely devoid of any human empathy or basic moral remorse. Exactly, he agreed callously. Once we officially secure this massive lake estate from her senile father, I will quietly divorce her, take half of whatever assets she has left, and leave her saddled with the mountain of debt I secretly built. She will be financially ruined for the rest of her pathetic life, and we will be sitting pretty in this gorgeous house. The sheer audacity and calculated evil within his chilling statement hung heavily in the dark room. They were celebrating the absolute destruction of an innocent woman who had shown them nothing but pure generosity and blind devotion. They were truly absolute monsters without any shred of genuine humanity remaining. I sat alone in the pitch-black basement listening to their horrific laughter echo loudly through my digital headphones. A burning, uncontrollable rage erupted deep inside my chest, far hotter and more intense than anything I had ever felt in my entire 69 years of life. I was still clutching a heavy ceramic coffee mug in my right hand. Without even realizing what I was doing, my large fingers instinctively tightened around the thick handle. My grip grew harder and harder, fueled by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal I had just witnessed. Suddenly, a sharp, violent crack shattered the absolute silence of my basement sanctuary. The sturdy ceramic mug completely exploded in my palm, breaking into dozens of jagged, razor-sharp shards. Hot coffee splashed directly across my jeans and several deep cuts opened up across my skin, but I did not feel even a single ounce of physical pain. The burning fury rushing through my veins totally eclipsed everything else. I slowly stood up, letting the broken, bloody ceramic pieces drop heavily onto the cold concrete floor. This twisted game was no longer simply about protecting my beautiful lake house from a bunch of arrogant, bankrupt squatters. It was not about punishing them for their disrespect or their blatant, disgusting racism. This was now a desperate, vital mission of absolute parental protection. Brad had maliciously targeted my brilliant, hardworking daughter, turning her trusting nature into a financial slaughterhouse. He was actively ruining her entire future to fund his own pathetic fake lifestyle. My mission immediately changed right then and there. I was going to absolutely destroy the very foundation of the man who dared to manipulate, exploit, and bankrupt my only child without any hesitation. He would soon pay a very steep and permanent price for this. I walked over to the small basement sink and turned on the cold water. Grabbing a clean towel, I firmly wiped the fresh blood and spilled coffee from my throbbing palm, watching the red drops swirl down the metal drain. My mind was racing, calculating my exact next steps to dismantle their entire fraudulent reality. Suddenly, the familiar crunch of gravel outside broke my fierce concentration. I paused, tilting my head to listen closely. A heavy car door slammed shut directly above my head. I recognized that distinctive engine sound instantly. It was Aaliyah. My hard-working, beautiful daughter had just pulled into the driveway for her promised weekend visit. The ultimate pawn in their sick, twisted game had arrived at the battleground. I wrapped a bandage around my cut hand and smiled coldly. The psychological warfare was about to officially begin inside my home right now, and I was ready. Aaliyah walked through the heavy wooden front door, dropping her designer medical bag onto the entryway bench with a deep, exhausted sigh. She had just successfully finished a grueling 36-hour surgical shift at the downtown hospital, and the dark circles under her beautiful brown eyes told the entire story of her profound fatigue. Before she could even take off her coat, Brad rushed over with a sickeningly sweet smile plastered across his face. He wrapped his arms around her, kissing her forehead like the perfect, loving husband he pretended to be. He took her jacket, rubbing her shoulders with feigned affection. "You work far too hard, my love," Brad murmured softly, his voice dripping with absolute fake concern. "I am so glad you are finally home. We really need to talk about your father, though." Aaliyah immediately tensed up, looking up at him with instant worry. Brad sighed heavily, shaking his head slowly as if he carried the weight of the world. "He has been acting very strangely lately, Aaliyah. Just this early morning, he left the gas stove completely turned on and walked away. The whole kitchen smelled like gas. If my mother had not walked in and turned it off, the entire house could have exploded. We are all becoming incredibly terrified for his personal health and safety." I stood quietly in the dark hallway shadow, listening to his blatant, fabricated lie. I had not touched the stove all morning long. Brad had deliberately turned the gas dial himself just to begin building his malicious narrative. Aaliyah rubbed her temples, looking absolutely devastated by the terrifying news. She trusted her husband implicitly, completely unaware that he was aggressively planting the poisonous seeds of deceit to steal her entire inheritance and completely ruin her beautiful life forever. I took a deep breath, adjusting my expression to look utterly bewildered and fragile before stepping out of the shadows. I walked slowly into the bright living room, carrying a small porcelain cup of hot tea in my bandaged right hand. My posture was deliberately hunched, my steps intentionally hesitant and slow, mimicking the physical decline they desperately wanted to see. Aaliyah immediately rushed to my side, her face twisting with genuine emotional agony. "Dad, are you feeling all right today?" she asked gently, placing her warm hand over my trembling arm. "Brad said there was an incident in the kitchen this morning with the stove." I stared blankly at her, blinking several times as if trying to grasp a fleeting thought. "The stove," I murmured softly, letting my voice waver with manufactured uncertainty. "I do not remember touching any stove today, sweetheart." My mind must have wandered off again. Brad stood behind her, flashing a wicked, triumphant smile at his parents. Mitchell and Brenda sat proudly on my expensive sofa, watching my performance with hungry, predatory eyes. To fully sell the illusion of my rapidly failing mind, I purposely allowed my hand to shake violently. The hot tea sloshed over the rim of the porcelain cup, spilling dark brown liquid directly onto the expensive rug and splashing across my leather slippers. "Oh no," I stammered, fumbling clumsily with my free hand. "I am so terribly sorry. I am just so terribly clumsy lately." Aaliyah grabbed a napkin, dropping to her knees to help clean the mess. "Dad, please sit down and rest," she pleaded, her voice cracking with pure heartbreak. I let her guide me toward the armchair. As I sat down, I looked directly at Mitchell, narrowing my eyes as if peering through a thick, confusing fog. I pointed a dramatically shaking, trembling finger at him. "Aaliyah, who is this strange man sitting on our couch?" I asked loudly, pitching my voice to sound entirely terrified and deeply lost. "I do not know him. Why exactly is this strange, unknown man inside our house?" Mitchell chuckled softly, exchanging a highly satisfied, victorious glance with Brenda. Aaliyah looked absolutely devastated, tears suddenly welling up in her beautiful eyes as she realized her brilliant father no longer recognized his own family members. Brad puffed out his chest, stepping forward to comfortably wrap his arm around his weeping wife. "See," Brad whispered smoothly, acting like the voice of reason. "His mind is completely gone, Aaliyah. He is a massive danger to himself and to everyone else. We absolutely have to take immediate and swift legal control over everything today before he accidentally gets himself or someone else severely hurt inside this big house." Brenda immediately seized the golden opportunity. She stood up from the sofa, smoothing down her designer blouse, and walked over to the armchair where I sat, looking incredibly frail. She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket and smoothed it out on the wooden coffee table right in front of me. She then retrieved a silver pen from her designer purse. "DeAndre, honey," Brenda cooed in a sickeningly soothing tone, leaning down so her face was level with mine. "We are just so incredibly worried about your declining health. Brad and Aaliyah work so hard, and we want to ensure you are perfectly safe while they are busy. This document right here is merely a basic temporary medical power of attorney. It just simply allows Brad to make small health decisions for you in case you have another confusing accident like you did this morning with the gas stove. It is just a standard safety precaution for your failing mind. We want to protect you, DeAndre. Aaliyah wiped a tear from her cheek, looking completely torn. She was physically exhausted from saving lives all day and emotionally battered by the perfectly orchestrated manipulation happening right before her eyes. Brad rubbed her back gently, whispering sweet reassurances into her ear to keep her perfectly compliant. "It is just temporary," Aaliyah Brad promised smoothly. "Just until we can schedule a proper doctor appointment for him next week. We are doing this because we love him so much." I stared blankly at the highly suspicious document lying on the table. It was so incredibly poorly drafted, an absolute complete legal joke that any real lawyer would instantly tear to shreds, but they genuinely thought I was far too stupid to ever notice the massive, glaring legal errors hidden right there now. Aaliyah hesitated, her beautiful eyes darting nervously between the questionable piece of paper and my supposedly vacant expression. "I do not know about this, Brad," she whispered softly, her voice shaking with heavy doubt. "Maybe we should wait and consult a proper professional first." Brad instantly tightened his firm, controlling grip on her shoulder, pushing the silver pen closer toward my hand. "We do not have time to wait," he insisted firmly. "We must secure his overall health and personal safety right here today." I gave my daughter a blank, wide and innocent smile to completely reassure her. With a deliberately trembling hand, I reached out, took the heavy silver pen from Brenda, and scribbled my signature boldly across the bottom line without even looking down at the printed text. The Covingtons immediately exchanged intensely triumphant looks, completely unaware that handing me this fake document was their absolute fatal mistake. The very next morning, I started my rusty old truck and backed out of the gravel driveway, leaving my arrogant son-in-law and his parasitic parents to enjoy their stolen luxury. I merged onto the highway, heading straight into the towering glass skyline of the city. I pulled my beaten vehicle into the underground parking garage of the most prestigious corporate law firm on the entire East Coast. I bypassed the main reception desk and took the private elevator directly up to the penthouse office. Eris Thorne was already waiting for me. Eris was not just a lawyer. He was a ruthless, brilliant wealth manager who had aggressively protected my massive 8-figure fortune for over 2 decades. He wore an immaculate tailored suit that cost more than Brad earned in an entire year. I sat down in the plush leather chair across from his massive oak desk and slid the folded piece of paper across the polished wood. Eris picked up the document Brenda had forced me to sign yesterday. He read the first few lines and immediately burst into loud, hysterical laughter. He threw his head back, his deep chuckles echoing off the glass walls of his corner office. "DeAndre, this is absolutely incredible," Eris managed to say, wiping a genuine tear of pure amusement from his sharp eye. "This so-called medical power of attorney is a complete and utter legal joke. It was clearly printed off some cheap internet website. It lacks proper notarization, it has zero medical standing, and it carries absolutely no legal weight whatsoever in this state. They truly believe they have successfully trapped you with a worthless piece of garbage paper. They are completely foolish people, my good old loyal friend." I smiled back at him, feeling deeply satisfied right now. I leaned forward and rested my elbows on the cold glass surface of his desk, letting my smile slowly fade into a mask of absolute determination. I did not come here just to laugh at their profound stupidity. "Eris," I stated firmly, my voice dropping low, "I came here to finally execute the financial maneuver we previously discussed. I want you to pull the trigger on the Covington family assets immediately." Eris stopped laughing instantly, his posture shifting from amused friend to deadly corporate shark. He opened a highly secure file on his computer, his fingers flying rapidly across the mechanical keyboard. "Let me bring up the exact portfolio right now," he murmured, his eyes scanning the glowing monitor. "As you know, DeAndre, when Mitchell and Brenda Covington officially defaulted on their massive estate mortgage, the primary bank quietly auctioned off their toxic debt to private investors to quickly recoup their heavy losses." I nodded silently, waiting for him to confirm the glorious reality. "We operated through your anonymous shell corporation, Sullivan Holdings Ares," continued, turning the monitor so I could clearly see the heavily redacted banking screens. "We swooped in and aggressively purchased every single outstanding loan they possess. You are the faceless corporate entity who officially bought their $500,000 debt, DeAndre. You do not just hold the primary mortgage note on their foreclosed property, You legally own the rights to their unpaid vehicles, their delinquent business lines, and all their outstanding credit judgments. You literally own them, body and soul, sitting right there in your chair." The sheer gravity of his words hung in the quiet room like a heavy velvet curtain. Brad genuinely believed he was a brilliant financial mastermind, sneaking his bankrupt parents into my pristine lake house to escape their vicious creditors. He had absolutely no idea that the very creditor they were running away from was the exact same man pouring their morning coffee every single day. "Send out the formal default notices today," I commanded, locking eyes with my trusted attorney. "I want those penalties to severely compound overnight. I want Sullivan Holdings to ruthlessly squeeze their empty accounts until they have absolutely nothing left to their pathetic names." Eris typed a rapid command, hitting the execution key with a sharp, decisive strike. "It is done, DeAndre," he confirmed softly. "The financial trap is permanently sprung. But we still face one extremely complicated legal hurdle regarding your beautiful daughter Aaliyah and her terrible husband. We must absolutely guarantee her financial safety immediately." I stared at him, nodding slowly in total agreement, ready for battle. This was the most critical phase of my entire plan. I listened closely to his strict instructions. Eris folded his hands together and leaned across his pristine desk, his voice dead serious. "Here is the painful reality, DeAndre. Aaliyah makes an incredibly high salary as a surgical resident, while Brad earns significantly less in his mid-level finance position. If she files for a standard divorce right now in this state, the current laws will absolutely force her to pay him massive monthly alimony payments. He will successfully drain her hard-earned income for many years to come." I narrowed my eyes, feeling my jaw clench tightly. "I will never allow that parasite to touch any of my precious child and her money," I declared coldly. "Exactly," Eris agreed, pointing a sharp finger at me. "Which is exactly why we desperately need Brad to commit a fully documented major felony. We must capture undeniable, hard evidence of him committing severe identity theft or aggressive wire fraud against her. You mentioned he admitted on camera to secretly opening credit lines under her name." "Yes," I replied quickly. "He confessed to burying her in debt." Eris smiled a terrifying, calculating smile. "Then we must bait him into taking one final, desperate, massive action. Once he attempts to legally transfer your estate fraudulently or forge her signature on a major deed, we destroy him. A clean divorce, no alimony, and guaranteed prison time for Brad." I nodded, feeling cold satisfaction wash completely over my soul. The trap was perfect. We just needed the arrogant fool to confidently step right into it today. "He will fall for it perfectly," I promised firmly. "My daughter will be totally safe. He will be utterly ruined, and we will watch him burn gracefully to the ground, completely helpless to stop it happening to him. Now very soon we will surely win this war, absolutely." Suddenly, a sharp vibration echoed against the polished oak desk. My cell phone screen lit up brightly, displaying an urgent motion notification from my newly installed home security application. I picked up the device and tapped the alert, bringing up the crisp, live video feed from my front porch. Brad was standing outside the heavy wooden door, excitedly shaking hands with a man carrying a professional clipboard and a laser measuring tool. I watched closely as the stranger handed Brad a glossy business card. It was a real estate appraiser. Brad was wasting absolutely no time whatsoever. The arrogant fool was actively initiating the property valuation process, hoping to quickly flip my beautiful estate behind my back. I turned the phone around to show Eris the live video feed. We both smiled warmly at the glowing screen. "The rat has just aggressively entered the steel trap," I murmured quietly. I returned to the lake house later that afternoon to find the driveway packed with expensive luxury vehicles. A silver Mercedes, a sleek white Range Rover, and a custom Porsche completely blocked my garage. I parked my old truck on the street and walked up the gravel path, listening to the high-pitched laughter drifting from the back patio. Brenda was hosting an impromptu afternoon tea party for her snooty high society friends. I stood in the kitchen completely out of sight and watched them through the glass doors. 4 women dripping in fake diamonds and designer dresses were lounging lazily on my custom deck furniture, sipping chilled champagne and eating delicate finger sandwiches. Brenda sat right in the center, acting like a ruling queen holding court over her loyal subjects. She swept her arm in a wide theatrical arc, gesturing toward the beautiful shimmering lake and the pristine manicured lawns that I had personally designed and paid for. Can you believe the sheer incredible scale of this gorgeous property? Brenda boasted loudly, making absolutely sure her shrill voice carried across the water. Brad is just such an incredibly successful and devoted son. He surprised us with this magnificent estate as an early retirement gift. He insisted we move in immediately so we could finally escape the dreadful noise of the city. He bought the entire place in cash, of course. Her friends gasped in unison, showering her with fake compliments and jealous praise. They marveled at the massive stone fireplace and the expensive cedar decking. Brenda soaked up their envy like a thirsty sponge, completely erasing my existence from my own property. She was living a total fantasy entirely funded by my hard work and her son's massive fraudulent lies right now before my vigilant, watchful eyes. I decided to make my presence completely known to the uninvited guests. I deliberately pushed open the heavy sliding glass door and stepped out onto my own wooden patio. The sudden noise made Brenda spin around in sheer absolute panic. Her fake smile vanished instantly, replaced by a look of sheer terror as she stared at my worn-out plaid shirt and muddy work boots. She clearly had not planned on her wealthy friends seeing the actual homeowner interrupting her beautiful fantasy. "Oh my goodness," Brenda nervously stammered frantically, waving her hands to distract her confused guests. "Ladies, please just completely ignore him. This is DeAndre, my newly hired gardener. He just works for us on an hourly wage, maintaining the grounds and handling basic physical labor outside." I stopped walking and looked directly into her terrified eyes. I saw the desperate, pathetic pleading in her gaze, begging me not to publicly humiliate her in front of her high society social circle. Instead of exposing her massive lie right there, I decided to play along and use her disgusting, blatant racism entirely to my profound ultimate advantage today. "Good afternoon, ladies," I said, offering them a very polite, deeply respectful bow. "I am so terribly sorry to interrupt your lovely gathering. I was merely coming to collect the empty serving trays from the table." One of the women, wearing an obnoxiously large pearl necklace, looked at me with total disdain and waved her hand dismissively. "Well, since you are already here, gardener, be useful and fetch us some fresh appetizers from the kitchen," she ordered rudely. I offered a wide, subservient smile. "Of course, ma'am," I replied smoothly. "Right away." I walked back inside and prepared a fresh silver platter of expensive cheeses and imported crackers. As I arranged the food, I reached into my pocket and pulled out a tiny, high-tech micro-audio recorder. I used a small piece of double-sided tape to secure the incredibly powerful recording device directly onto the bottom of the heavy silver tray. I carried the platter back outside and gently placed it down right in the center of their table. "Enjoy your delicious snacks, ladies," I murmured, keeping my head bowed low as I backed away humbly. Brenda let out a massive sigh of profound relief, entirely convinced she had successfully dodged a massive bullet. She truly believed she had effortlessly put the poor black gardener right back into his proper lowly place. She had absolutely zero clue she had just unknowingly invited a highly advanced audio listening device straight into her most private inner circle today for me to fully exploit very easily right now. This was simply perfect timing. I retreated straight down to the basement, securely locking the heavy door behind me. I opened my iPad, connected my wireless headphones, and tuned directly into the audio feed transmitting from the silver serving tray upstairs. The sound quality was absolutely immaculate. I could hear the crisp clinking of their crystal champagne flutes and every single toxic, arrogant word spilling from Brenda's mouth. "These people are just rich idiots," Brenda hissed maliciously to her friends, leaning close so the microphone caught every syllable. "We are simply using them to establish our dominance in this exclusive neighborhood. My son Brad has everything completely handled behind the scenes. In just a few short weeks, we will have full legal guardianship over that senile old gardener you just saw. Then this entire estate will officially belong to us permanently." One of the women gasped, giggling with obvious wicked delight. "That is absolutely brilliant, Brenda. When do you plan to make the grand announcement?" I held my breath, waiting eagerly for her response. "Oh, it is going to be incredibly spectacular," Brenda boasted proudly, her voice dripping with sheer, unearned arrogance. "Brad is organizing a massive high society 4th of July party right here on this magnificent lakefront lawn. We are inviting everyone who is anyone in the entire city. Fireworks, expensive caterers, the absolute finest vintage champagne. Right in the middle of the beautiful celebration, Brad is going to stand up and officially announce our permanent ownership of the estate to the entire world. It will be the absolute crowning achievement of our lives. I smiled coldly in the dark. A massive 4th of July party filled with the city's most elite socialites. They were unknowingly building their very own public execution stage right now for me to use against them very soon. I carefully saved the pristine audio recording and securely backed it up to my encrypted cloud server. The 4th of July was only a few short weeks away. It was absolutely the perfect date for their grand, spectacular downfall. Brad wanted an unforgettable holiday filled with fireworks, rich guests, and ultimate victory. I would ensure he got plenty of fireworks, just not the kind he was eagerly expecting. However, before I could drop the massive legal hammer and completely obliterate the Covington family, I had one vital task remaining. I could not let my beautiful daughter suffer as collateral damage when this toxic bomb finally exploded. Aaliyah was completely blinded by her fake marriage. I needed to shatter her dangerous illusion safely and securely before the grand party. I grabbed my keys, ready to wake her up to the harsh truth today, because her future urgently depended on it right now. I parked my old truck outside the busy downtown diner located just 2 blocks away from the large main hospital. I walked inside and immediately spotted Aaliyah sitting alone in a quiet corner booth. She was wearing her blue surgical scrubs, staring blankly at a cold cup of coffee. The dark shadows under her beautiful eyes broke my heart, a clear testament to the brutal 80-hour shifts she worked just to unknowingly fund her husband's toxic, fake lifestyle. I slid into the vinyl booth directly across from her. She looked up, offering a very weak, exhausted smile. "Dad, I am so glad you came to meet me," she murmured softly, her voice heavy with immense stress. She reached into her leather tote bag and pulled out a stack of glossy, colorful pamphlets. She pushed them across the sticky table toward me with a trembling hand. "Brad asked me to give these to you today," she explained, refusing to make direct eye contact. "They are brochures for several assisted living facilities and private nursing homes in the area. He strongly believes you are becoming a massive danger to yourself, Dad. He says your mind is rapidly declining and that you need round-the-clock professional medical supervision before something terrible happens." Aaliyah swallowed hard, clearly hating every single word leaving her mouth. "I know this is incredibly hard to discuss," she continued, "but Brad says it is for your own safety. We just genuinely want to protect you." I looked down at the expensive brochures advertising luxurious senior care. I did not yell, scream, or throw the insulting pamphlets back in her face. Instead, I calmly pushed them far over to the side. "Aaliyah," I said softly, "you need to see the absolute truth about your perfect husband right now." I reached into my worn leather messenger bag and pulled out my high-definition iPad. I set it firmly on the table between us and tapped the screen to unlock it. I opened the encrypted security application and loaded the crisp 4K video footage I had captured directly from my basement sanctuary the previous night. I turned the volume up high enough so the audio would cut clearly through the background noise of the busy diner. I slid the sleek tablet across the sticky table surface, pushing it right in front of her folded hands. "Just watch this," I commanded gently but firmly. Aaliyah looked highly confused for a brief second before she finally lowered her eyes to the glowing screen. The video began playing immediately. She watched in total silence as the high-resolution camera showed her supposedly loving husband lounging comfortably on my living room sofa alongside his arrogant parents, Mitchell and Brenda. Brad was holding a glass of my most expensive scotch, laughing wickedly. Aaliyah leaned forward, her brow furrowing tightly as she recognized the exact layout of my home. Then Brad started speaking. The sharp, crystal-clear audio transmitted his chilling, malicious words directly into her ears. "I already have everything completely under control on my end," Brad boasted arrogantly on the recording, his voice dripping with venomous pride. "I simply leveraged my brilliant, hard-working, and completely oblivious wife." Aaliyah gasped softly, her hand flying up to cover her mouth in sheer horror. She watched completely paralyzed as her husband continued to brag to his deeply greedy parents about his massive financial betrayal. She is so exhausted when she walks through the front door that she never even glances at our financial statements, Brad sneered callously on the screen. I secretly maxed out every single one of her personal credit lines. I took out massive personal loans under her name and completely drained her high-yield savings accounts. She essentially bailed you guys out without even knowing she did it. Mitchell cheered loudly in the video, toasting his son's successful fraud. "That is my boy," Mitchell praised proudly. "She is just a stupid cash cow anyway. As long as you keep playing the perfect loving husband, she will keep working those endless hospital shifts to pay off our debts." Aaliyah physically recoiled as the devastating words struck her like a violent physical blow. Her entire marriage, her entire life with this man had been nothing but an elaborately staged, incredibly cruel financial scam, carefully designed to drain her completely dry. She sat absolutely frozen in the corner booth, staring at the paused video frame with a look of pure, unadulterated shock covering her beautiful face. For several agonizing seconds, Aaliyah did not move a single muscle. Then the heavy, crushing reality of Brad's horrific betrayal finally shattered her completely. The glowing iPad screen went totally dark, reflecting the devastated expression of a woman whose entire universe had just violently collapsed. She let out a sharp, ragged gasp, immediately burying her beautiful face deeply into both of her trembling hands. Her shoulders shook violently as deep, guttural sobs began tearing through her chest. She wept openly, completely ignoring the curious glances of the other diners sitting nearby. She was mourning the brutal, sudden death of her seemingly perfect marriage. All those grueling, exhausting night shifts at the busy downtown hospital, all those sacrificed weekends, and all the endless fatigue she endured were never truly building their shared future. She had simply been blindly feeding a vicious, greedy parasite masquerading as her loving husband. She cried for the incredible emotional manipulation, realizing that every sweet compliment, every gentle kiss, and every reassuring hug from Brad was just a carefully orchestrated lie to keep her working like a blind, obedient machine. The profound, sickening humiliation of realizing that Mitchell and Brenda were fully aware of the massive scam added a fresh, agonizing layer of pain to her shattered heart. They had gladly accepted her stolen money while secretly laughing at her sheer ignorance behind closed doors. She wept until she had absolutely no tears left to shed, her entire body physically exhausted by the heavy emotional toll. I remained perfectly silent across the table, allowing her the necessary time to fully process the catastrophic destruction of her fake reality. She needed to feel this profound, devastating pain completely so she could successfully transform it into powerful, undeniable motivation for the massive upcoming fight ahead of us starting today. I slowly reached across the sticky diner table and gently took both of her trembling hands in mine. My firm, warm grip offered her the silent, unwavering strength she desperately needed right now. The tears eventually stopped falling from her beautiful face. The legendary Sullivan resilience, a powerful trait passed down through generations of our hardworking family, finally kicked in. Aaliyah took a deep, shuddering breath and pulled a paper napkin from the metal dispenser. She wiped her damp cheeks, completely drying her eyes. I watched in total awe as her expression rapidly transformed. The profound heartbreak vanished entirely quickly, replaced by an intense cold and highly calculated rage. Her jaw clenched tightly, and her posture instantly straightened with fierce determination. She stared directly into my waiting eyes, her voice completely devoid of any previous emotional weakness. "Tell me, what is the exact plan to utterly destroy him today, Dad?" Aaliyah walked through the heavy front doors of the lake house later that afternoon, completely burying her raging fury beneath a flawless mask of absolute devotion. She found Brad lounging lazily on the expensive leather sofa in the living room, flipping through channels on the massive television. He looked up, offering her that same fake, sickeningly sweet smile she now recognized as pure poison. "Hey baby, how was your shift today?" Brad asked smoothly. Aaliyah did not hesitate or flinch for a single second. She walked straight over to the sofa, leaned down, and pressed a soft, lingering kiss directly onto his cheek. "It was perfectly fine, my love," she replied in a gentle, exhausted whisper. "I am just so happy to finally be home with my wonderful husband." Brad beamed proudly, entirely convinced his manipulation was still working flawlessly. "I'm going to jump in the shower real quick," he announced, standing up and stretching his arms. "I want to take you out for a nice dinner tonight." As soon as the bathroom door clicked shut and the sound of running water echoed down the long hallway, Aaliyah sprang into rapid action. She sprinted silently into their shared bedroom and dropped to her knees beside his leather briefcase. Her hands moved with expert surgical precision. She unzipped the heavy bag and pulled out his thick black financial ledgers. Pulling her smartphone from her pocket, she quickly snapped high-resolution photographs of every single page. She captured the hidden credit card statements, the fraudulent loan documents, and the detailed records of the massive debts he had secretly piled onto her name. She zipped the bag perfectly, leaving absolutely no trace of her swift, devastating espionage. She smiled coldly at the closed bathroom door, knowing she held his absolute destruction now. The very next morning, while Brad was foolishly out shopping for expensive custom-tailored suits using her compromised credit, Aaliyah marched straight into the towering glass headquarters of Heiress Thorne. She did not look like an exhausted, overworked doctor anymore. She moved with the exact same ruthless, terrifying precision that her father possessed. Sitting across from the elite wealth manager, she immediately handed over the encrypted digital files containing every single photograph she had covertly captured from Brad's hidden leather briefcase. Heiress reviewed the damning evidence on his large monitor, his sharp eyes gleaming with sheer, predatory delight. "This is absolutely flawless work," Aaliyah, the brilliant attorney, praised, typing rapidly on his mechanical keyboard to upload the pristine images directly into his secure legal database. Brad has completely documented his own massive wire fraud and felony identity theft. Now, we must move aggressively to physically protect your existing assets before he can drain another single dime from your hard-earned income. For the next 3 hours, Aaliyah and Heiress executed a series of brilliant, perfectly coordinated financial maneuvers. Operating entirely behind a wall of corporate privacy laws, Aaliyah officially authorized Heiress to forcefully drain every single joint checking and savings account she shared with Brad, leaving only a pathetic sum of $3 behind, just to keep the accounts technically active and avoid triggering any immediate automatic banking alerts. Next, she officially froze her entire investment portfolio, firmly locking the funds behind a complex, impenetrable legal barrier that Brad could never access. Finally, Heiress expertly established an incredibly secure, untouchable blind trust located completely offshore. Aaliyah permanently redirected her massive hospital salary, her future surgical bonuses, and all her remaining liquid assets directly into this perfectly shielded account. By the time she finally stood up to leave the sprawling corner office, her massive personal wealth was completely vanished from the public record. Brad genuinely thought he was a brilliant financial mastermind, slowly siphoning his wealthy wife completely dry. He had absolutely zero clue that Aaliyah had just quietly, efficiently severed his greedy, parasitic lifeline permanently. She walked back out into the bustling city streets, breathing deeply for the very first time in months. Her entire future was firmly secured, and the crushing weight of her fake marriage was finally lifting off her shoulders. The trap was now fully operational, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to violently snap shut around her utterly oblivious, horribly arrogant husband and his equally disgusting, deeply entitled parents. She smiled, feeling the powerful Sullivan blood pumping fiercely through her veins. She eagerly anticipated watching their entire greedy world burn straight down to ash, leaving them with absolutely nothing at all today and forever. Perfect. Back at the lake house, Brad was aggressively accelerating his hostile takeover. I was sitting comfortably at my kitchen island, sipping a fresh cup of coffee, when a massive commercial van pulled directly into my driveway. 3 burly men wearing heavy tool belts and carrying massive sledgehammers marched straight through my front door. Brad stood right in the center of my gorgeous living room, pointing arrogantly toward the beautiful load-bearing wall that perfectly separated the dining area from the custom sunroom. "I want this entire ugly wall completely knocked down by this afternoon," Brad loudly commanded the lead contractor. "My mother Brenda wants an open concept layout for her upcoming summer parties, and I am officially authorizing the full demolition today." I watched silently as the confused contractor glanced nervously in my direction, clearly recognizing me as the actual homeowner. The man hesitated, his heavy sledgehammer resting awkwardly against his shoulder. "Sir, are you absolutely sure you want us tearing into this primary wall?" the worker asked me quietly. Brad immediately scoffed, rolling his eyes with profound irritation. "Ignore the old guy," Brad barked forcefully. "He is completely senile and no longer makes any important decisions regarding this estate. I am completely in charge now. Just start smashing the drywall immediately." I did not raise my voice, nor did I stop them from destroying my beautiful home. Instead, I smiled cheerfully and walked straight toward my stainless steel refrigerator. "Please, gentlemen, do exactly as my brilliant son-in-law says," I announced warmly. "Demolition is incredibly hard physical work, so I will prepare some delicious turkey sandwiches and iced tea for your lunch break today." I happily hummed a soft melody, watching Brad foolishly orchestrate his own catastrophic, incredibly expensive legal ruin, completely unaware of his impending doom approaching. The glorious morning of the 4th of July finally arrived, bringing bright sunshine and incredibly clear blue skies over the sparkling water. A massive fleet of luxury catering vans pulled up my gravel driveway, unloading expensive silver chafing dishes, premium floral arrangements, and towering tiers of imported champagne. Brad stood proudly at the massive iron front gate, dressed impeccably in a crisp, custom-tailored white linen suit. He adjusted his expensive designer sunglasses, practically vibrating with sheer arrogance as he eagerly prepared to greet his wealthy high society guests. Brenda buzzed around the newly destroyed living room, barking harsh orders at the frantic waitstaff while wearing a stolen diamond necklace. They both genuinely believed today was their ultimate coronation, their magnificent ascension into permanent wealth. The trap was now fully primed, completely loaded, and waiting patiently for the absolute perfect moment to finally explode violently right in their greedy faces. By mid-afternoon, my expansive lakeside lawn was completely transformed into a sprawling playground for the local high society elite. Over 100 wealthy guests mingled across the freshly cut grass, dressed in their finest summer country club attire. White linen suits and brightly colored silk dresses dotted the landscape, completely clashing with the peaceful natural beauty of the surrounding forest. A massive team of hired waiters navigated gracefully through the dense crowd, carrying gleaming silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of imported vintage champagne. Every single expensive drop of that luxurious liquor had been fraudulently charged directly to Aaliyah's soon-to-be frozen credit cards. Brad was sparing absolutely no expense to impress his superficial social circle, completely oblivious to the impending financial doom hanging over his head. Brenda was in her absolute glory. She paraded confidently around the stone patio, laughing loudly and waving her hands to catch the attention of anyone willing to look her way. Around her neck, she brazenly wore a stunning vintage diamond pendant that had belonged to my late wife. She had shamelessly raided my private belongings the moment I moved my bags down into the basement. I watched her flaunt the stolen heirloom from a distance, feeling a cold, calculating calm wash over me. She truly believed she had successfully stolen my legacy and replaced my family's history with her own pathetic facade. The sheer audacity of her public display only fueled my determination. Every arrogant laugh and every clink of those expensive crystal glasses was another nail being driven firmly into their collective coffin today. They were having the absolute best time of their lives, completely unaware that they were aggressively celebrating on the very stage where their entire fake empire would soon violently and publicly collapse into permanent dark ruin. I was quietly checking the wiring on the massive speaker system when a heavy hand suddenly grabbed my shoulder. Brad roughly pulled me aside, dragging me forcefully away from the beautifully decorated patio and pushing me toward the large outdoor barbecue station tucked away near the edge of the property boundary. His face was flushed with cheap arrogance and far too much expensive champagne. He glared at my simple, comfortable clothing with a look of pure, unadulterated revulsion. "Listen to me very carefully," DeAndre Brad snapped, keeping his voice low so none of his precious friends would hear his viciously toxic words. "You need to stay right back here behind this heavy barbecue smoke for the rest of the evening. I do not want you wandering around the main lawn bothering anyone." I stared at him, my expression deliberately blank. "Is there a specific problem with me enjoying the fresh air in my own backyard today?" I asked quietly, letting my voice waver slightly to maintain the illusion of a helpless, confused old man. Brad sneered, stepping aggressively closer to my face. "Do not play dumb with me," he hissed, pointing a sharp, manicured finger directly at my chest. "Look at these wealthy people out there. They are powerful investors, elite corporate executives, and esteemed high society socialites. My distinguished guests simply do not mix with your kind. You stick out like a massive, embarrassing sore thumb in that pathetic outfit. I am officially announcing our permanent ownership of this spectacular estate tonight, and I refuse to let a senile, poor black mechanic ruin my perfect, flawless image. Just stay out of our sight and do not embarrass me tonight. Understood?" The blatant, disgusting racism and fierce classist hatred dripping from his hateful words were absolutely sickening, yet I felt a profound sense of dark victory. Brad was foolishly digging his own grave deeper and deeper with every single arrogant syllable he confidently spoke. He truly believed he was addressing a completely powerless, irrelevant nobody who would simply bow down and humbly obey his vile, discriminatory commands. He had absolutely zero clue that the man standing quietly in front of him possessed 50 times the combined net worth of every single snobby guest currently trespassing on my manicured lawn. He had no idea that I held the ultimate power to instantly crush his entire miserable life into absolute unforgiving dust. The sheer ignorance pouring out of his smug, entitled face was almost poetic to witness firsthand right now. I slowly lowered my gaze, forcefully pushing down the immense, towering rage threatening to boil over inside my fiercely beating heart. I knew that extreme patience was my absolute best weapon today. I kept my eyes fixed firmly on the grass, projecting the perfect image of a defeated, utterly broken man. I let my shoulders slump forward slightly, completely masking the intense burning fire behind my calm demeanor. "Do not worry at all, son," I murmured humbly, ensuring my voice sounded appropriately weak and highly compliant. "I will stay completely out of your important guest's way tonight. I will just stand quietly right back here and manage the entire audio-visual system for your big presentation. I promise I will not cause any embarrassing trouble for you or your wonderful family." Brad smirked, looking incredibly satisfied with my pathetic, subservient response. He smugly adjusted the crisp lapels of his custom white linen suit and dusted a speck of imaginary dirt off his expensive sleeve. "Good," he replied coldly, turning his back on me without a single ounce of basic human respect. "Just stand by the control board and wait for my direct signal. Do not mess this up, DeAndre." This speech is extremely critical for my professional future and personal legacy. I watched him march triumphantly back into the massive, glittering crowd, immediately slipping his fake charming mask perfectly back into place as he warmly greeted a wealthy corporate executive. He genuinely believed he had won the ultimate victory over my home and my dignity. He thought he had effortlessly silenced the bothersome old man forever. But as I walked over to the sophisticated media control station hidden carefully behind the smoking grill, a genuine, terrifying smile spread widely across my face. He had just voluntarily handed me the master keys to his own spectacular, highly public execution. My fingers hovered gently over the shiny black buttons ready for total war. The game was finally reaching its spectacular climax here right now. As the hot summer afternoon slowly faded into a beautiful, vibrant evening, the bright sun finally dipped below the sparkling lake horizon, casting deep purple shadows across my sprawling lawn. The elegant landscape lighting automatically flickered on, illuminating the lavishly dressed crowd in a soft, expensive golden glow. Right on cue, a massive 100-inch outdoor projector screen was dramatically lowered from a custom-built truss suspended perfectly over the calm water. The sheer scale of the expensive setup commanded everyone's immediate attention. Standing right in the absolute center of the illuminated stone patio, Brad confidently raised his crystal champagne flute high into the cool night air. He tapped a silver spoon firmly against the fragile glass. The sharp, clear clinking sound echoed loudly across the water, demanding total silence from the elite crowd. The grand, inescapable moment of his absolute destruction had finally and most officially arrived tonight. The lively, excited chatter of the wealthy crowd slowly faded away as Brad stood under the warm glow of the patio lights. He cleared his throat very loudly, flashing a bright, incredibly fake smile at the sea of expectant faces. "Thank you all so very much for being here tonight to celebrate this massive milestone with my wonderful family." Brad began, his voice projecting smoothly across the manicured lawn. "As many of you know, I have always believed that relentless hard work and absolute dedication will eventually yield spectacular results. Tonight is the ultimate proof of that philosophy. I have spent years grinding away in the brutal financial sector, sacrificing my own comfort to build a truly magnificent life. And exactly why did I do it?" Brad paused, dramatically placing a hand over his heart. He looked directly at Mitchell and Brenda, who were standing right in the front row, glowing with unearned pride. "I did it for my beloved parents. They sacrificed absolutely everything to give me the best life possible. So it brings me immense joy to officially announce that I have purchased this spectacular lakefront estate entirely in cash. This gorgeous property is my ultimate retirement gift to them." The crowd immediately erupted into thunderous applause and loud, enthusiastic cheers. Wealthy executives nodded in deep approval while socialites wiped away fake tears of admiration. Brenda stepped forward and hugged Brad tightly, playing the role of the deeply grateful, loving mother to absolute perfection. They looked like the perfect, highly successful American family standing there in the spotlight. Brad soaked up every single ounce of their sickening praise, completely inflating his massive ego to absolute bursting. He had absolutely zero idea that the digital weapon aimed directly at his arrogant head was fully loaded and ready to fire. While Brad bathed in the glorious applause of his deceived audience, Aaliyah stood perfectly still, hidden safely within the deep shadows of the large oak tree near the edge of the sprawling patio. She watched her husband deliver his incredibly arrogant speech with an expression of pure icy detachment. The brilliant surgical resident was no longer the exhausted, manipulated woman who had blindly funded his pathetic lies for years. Her heart did not ache with any lingering sadness or tragic regret. Instead, she felt a powerful, profound sense of absolute liberation pulsing fiercely through her veins. Aaliyah slowly reached into her designer evening bag and pulled out her glowing smartphone. She quickly unlocked the bright screen, navigating effortlessly to her secure, highly encrypted mobile banking application. She bypassed the standard menus and accessed the deeply buried primary administrative controls that Eris Thorne had specifically set up for her earlier that week. Her dark eyes scanned the digital list of compromised joint financial accounts she had completely drained. Only one final active lifeline remained open to Brad. It was the platinum credit card he was currently using to illegally fund this massive, outrageously expensive catering disaster. Brad had already racked up $50,000 in pending charges for the vintage champagne, the imported caviar, and the giant outdoor projector screen. He genuinely believed that Aaliyah would simply cover the astronomical bill at the end of the month, just like she always did. He assumed she was busy working another miserable night shift at the downtown hospital, entirely clueless about his lavish, fraudulent spending spree. Aaliyah stared directly at the glowing blue button on her phone screen, reflecting quietly on all the exhausting night shifts she had endured just to blindly enrich this incredibly selfish man. She had missed holidays and birthdays, sacrificing her own happiness for his fake dreams. The button was labeled with a single, highly powerful command to permanently freeze the platinum card. She looked up from her digital device, locking her cold gaze onto Brad as he proudly raised his empty crystal glass to accept another round of enthusiastic cheers from the foolishly impressed high society crowd. Without hesitating for even a single fraction of a second, Aaliyah firmly tapped her thumb right against the glowing glass screen. A small green checkmark instantly appeared, confirming the absolute destruction of his last available financial resource. The expensive platinum credit card was now officially and permanently dead. Brad was officially completely and entirely cut off from her hard-earned money forever. Aaliyah slipped her phone quietly back into her purse and smiled in the dark. The ultimate financial kill switch had been successfully activated securely by her invisible hand tonight. Brad slowly handed his completely empty crystal champagne flute to a passing waiter and confidently pulled a sleek, silver laser pointer from the pocket of his tailored linen jacket. He spun around on his expensive leather loafers to face the massive 100-inch projector screen hovering gracefully over the shimmering lake water. The wealthy audience leaned eagerly forward in their expensive seats, completely mesmerized by his incredibly polished performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Brad announced loudly, making absolutely sure his booming voice reached every single guest standing on the lush green lawn. "Before we conclude this magnificent celebration and serve the main course, I want to share something truly special with all of you. My beautiful mother Brenda spent weeks carefully curating a wonderful visual presentation for this exact moment." He pointed the bright red laser beam directly at the center of the giant blank white screen. "We have prepared a highly emotional, deeply personal video documenting our incredible family journey over the past decade." Brad continued, his voice practically dripping with sickening manufactured sentimentality. "It perfectly highlights every single struggle we successfully overcame and beautifully showcases exactly how we managed to secure this glorious lakeside kingdom. I truly hope it inspires each and every one of you to chase your own grand dreams with absolute dedication and pure, unwavering honesty. Please direct your full attention toward the water. And now I want to proudly show you a video of our family's beautiful journey." Brad dramatically threw his arm outward, signaling me to begin the grand presentation. He stood there smiling, expecting a montage of old family photographs and fake smiles. He had absolutely zero idea that the highly destructive digital weapon aimed directly at his arrogant head was already fully loaded and completely ready to fire at him tonight. I stood quietly in the thick gray smoke drifting from the enormous outdoor barbecue grill. I stared at the sophisticated media control board resting firmly beneath my calloused hands. Brad had foolishly trusted me to operate the entire system. I looked up and locked eyes with my brilliant daughter hiding in the deep shadows. Aaliyah gave me one single determined nod. It was officially time to execute the final devastating strike against these absolute parasites. I placed my finger directly over the primary glowing green button and firmly hit play. The massive 100-inch projector screen instantly flashed blindingly white, illuminating the entire wealthy crowd in a harsh, sudden glare. The loud, cheerful background music abruptly cut off. The very first frame that appeared was definitely not a heartwarming family slideshow. It was crystal clear 4K night vision security footage showing the interior of my own private living room. The massive screen illuminated the dark lake with stunning clarity. The audience stared in absolute confusion at the high-definition footage of my private living room. The timestamp in the lower right corner blinked steadily, displaying a date from just 2 weeks ago. On the giant screen, the night vision lens captured 3 familiar figures huddled around my expensive mahogany coffee table. It was Brad Mitchell and Brenda, leaning close to one another like common thieves plotting a midnight heist. Before anyone on the lawn could even process the bizarre imagery, the state-of-the-art surround sound system roared to life. Brad's arrogant voice echoed across the water, amplified to a deafening volume that completely drowned out the gentle evening breeze. "That old black man is losing his mind. I will forge his signature next week. This house is ours." His recorded voice blasted through the premium speakers, dripping with sheer malice and profound disrespect. The pristine audio quality left absolutely zero room for doubt or misinterpretation. Every single malicious syllable was perfectly clear, reverberating off the trees and hitting the shocked ears of every elite guest present. On the screen, the giant grayscale version of Brad laughed wickedly, completely confirming his twisted criminal intentions for everyone to see. He shamelessly outlined his exact illegal methods, bragging about manipulating medical documents and stealing my massive lakeside property right out from under my nose. The stark contrast between the charming man standing frozen on the patio and the ruthless, scheming predator projected on the massive screen was absolutely jarring. His meticulously crafted facade of the perfect, hard-working son was being violently ripped apart, pixel by pixel, in front of the very people he desperately wanted to impress today, completely ending his fake kingdom right here tonight, forever and always. Dead silence violently swept across the sprawling, manicured lawn, suffocating the previously joyous celebration in an instant. The lively chatter, the arrogant boasting, and the superficial networking completely evaporated into the cool night air. Nobody dared to breathe. Nobody dared to move a single muscle. The absolute shock radiating through the massive crowd was palpable, hanging heavily over the expensive gathering like a thick, suffocating blanket of impending doom. Then the undeniable physical reactions rapidly began. Somewhere near the front row of white folding chairs, a wealthy corporate executive loosened his grip in pure disbelief. His expensive crystal champagne glass slipped right through his fingers, falling freely toward the earth. It hit the stone patio with a sharp, piercing crash, shattering into dozens of glittering pieces. The sudden violent noise acted like a contagious trigger. A domino effect of absolute horror rippled directly through the elite audience. 3 more delicate champagne flutes dropped in rapid succession, spilling expensive vintage liquor uselessly across the perfectly trimmed grass. The prestigious guests who just moments ago had blindly applauded Brad and his supposedly noble family sacrifice now stared at him with unadulterated disgust and utter revulsion. They had been aggressively tricked, invited here merely to serve as ignorant props in a disgusting, highly illegal real estate scam. The sheer public humiliation was completely intoxicating to witness. Mitchell Covington, who had been proudly puffing out his chest all evening long, instantly turned a sickening shade of ghost pale. All the arrogant blood completely drained from his older face, leaving him looking like a terrified, trapped animal entirely caught in the blinding headlights of an approaching freight train. He stumbled backward, his knees buckling slightly as the undeniable weight of federal criminal charges suddenly crashed down upon his shoulders. He reached out to blindly grab the edge of a catering table just to keep himself from collapsing completely onto the wet lawn. Brad was in an even worse state. He stood completely frozen in sheer, unadulterated terror right in the very center of the spotlight he had so eagerly demanded. The confident, booming speaker who had commanded the audience just moments ago was entirely gone, completely vaporized by the harsh light of absolute truth. His jaw hung loosely open, and his eyes darted frantically between the massive projector screen broadcasting his felonies and the 100 disgusted faces staring back at him. He looked absolutely pathetic, stripped entirely bare of his expensive linen suit and his fake corporate prestige. His breathing became incredibly shallow, and erratic panic consuming his soul entirely. He realized deeply his precious, wealthy, elite lifestyle was now totally finished forever and permanently destroyed by my flawless, brilliant, silent trap tonight, exactly here. The paralyzing silence was suddenly shattered by a piercing, hysterical shriek that echoed violently across the quiet lake. Brenda Covington had finally snapped out of her frozen stupor. The sheer reality of her massive public humiliation crashed down upon her incredibly fragile fake ego. She let out another deafening scream, her face twisting into a hideous mask of pure, unadulterated panic and blind desperation. Realizing that every single wealthy guest was currently watching her family confess to multiple felonies on a giant screen, she completely lost her mind. Brenda frantically kicked off her expensive designer heels, sending the shiny shoes flying randomly into the dark bushes. Barefoot and completely unhinged, she sprinted wildly across the damp evening grass, her silk dress flapping awkwardly around her knees. "Stop it!" she shrieked hysterically, waving her arms like a total madwoman. "Turn that horrible thing off right now." She charged directly toward the massive outdoor projector setup positioned near the edge of the water. She did not care about looking dignified or maintaining her fake high society grace anymore. She only wanted to plunge the devastating truth back into absolute darkness. Brenda dove recklessly toward the heavy equipment, frantically grabbing handfuls of thick black power cables running along the freshly cut lawn. She yanked and pulled with all her remaining pathetic strength, desperately trying to unplug the massive machine from its primary power source. She looked absolutely ridiculous, a supposedly elegant woman groveling in the dirt, wrestling hopelessly with dirty electrical cords in front of the entire elite neighborhood. Her frantic, muddy struggle was utterly useless. I had meticulously secured the primary connections tightly inside a locked heavy-duty weatherproof box earlier that afternoon. The giant screen continued glowing brightly, broadcasting their undeniable guilt to the entire shocked audience tonight perfectly without failing. I watched her pathetic, desperate struggle from my hidden position behind the large outdoor grilling station. The thick, savory barbecue smoke swirled slowly around my boots as I calmly picked up the wireless microphone resting on the digital control board. I flipped the power switch, ensuring my voice would easily overpower the chaotic murmurs spreading rapidly through the terrified crowd. Taking a deep, highly satisfying breath, I finally stepped completely out from the gray shadows and walked directly into the bright patio lights. I stared down at Brenda, who was still furiously tugging at the securely locked electrical box in the damp dirt. "Do not unplug it yet, Brenda." My deep, steady voice boomed loudly across the entire sprawling lakefront property, commanding absolute silence from everyone watching our grand event unfold tonight. "Please leave those thick cords alone. Your magnificent solo performance is up next for us to finally witness." I pressed a single button on my remote control, and the giant projector screen instantly shifted to a brand new scene. The crisp video showed my beautiful back patio bathed in warm afternoon sunlight from just a few days ago. There sat Brenda lounging on my expensive outdoor furniture, hosting her exclusive afternoon tea party. The camera angle perfectly captured her dripping in my stolen vintage diamond jewelry. The audio picked up her shrill, arrogant voice with absolute crystal clarity. "These guests are just rich idiots," Brenda sneered on the recording, laughing maliciously while holding a porcelain teacup. "We are simply using them to establish our dominance in this exclusive neighborhood. My son Brad has everything completely handled behind the scenes. In just a few short weeks, we will have full legal guardianship over that senile old gardener you just saw. Then this entire estate will officially belong to us permanently." The wealthy socialites standing on my lawn gasped in unison. The very women who had praised Brenda all evening now stared at her with pure, unadulterated revulsion. The entire high society crowd immediately turned on her with fierce hostility. Loud, disgusted murmurs spread like wildfire across the green grass. People began whispering harsh insults, realizing they had been invited merely to serve as gullible pawns in a pathetic, fraudulent social climbing scheme. Brenda froze in the dirt, her hands dropping the electrical cables she had been frantically pulling. She looked up at the faces of the elite women she had desperately tried to impress, watching their admiration morph into absolute contempt. The wealthy investors and corporate executives shook their heads in deep disgust, stepping away from the Covington family as if they were infected with a highly contagious disease. Their pathetic illusion was shattered perfectly right before my eyes. Brad stood frozen in the center of the patio, his custom white linen suit suddenly looking like a cheap costume. The sheer magnitude of his public humiliation finally snapped something deep inside his arrogant brain. The suffocating silence of the horrified crowd pressed down on him, stripping away his fake prestige and exposing the pathetic fraud hiding underneath. His wealthy friends were looking at him with undisguised pity and extreme contempt. The veins in his neck bulged prominently as his face turned a violent shade of crimson red. He realized his entire career, his social standing, and his stolen luxury lifestyle were completely destroyed in a matter of seconds. Blind, unadulterated rage completely consumed his rational thought. He could not accept that he had been outsmarted and publicly ruined by the very man he considered deeply inferior. Brad let out a primal, furious roar that echoed aggressively across the calm water. He turned his vicious glare toward me, his hands curling into tight, trembling fists. "You miserable old man!" Brad screamed wildly, completely losing control of his carefully crafted public persona. "You orchestrated this entire setup to humiliate me." He lunged forward, ignoring the shocked gasps of the remaining guests standing nearby. His heavy leather shoes pounded loudly against the stone patio as he aggressively charged directly at my position behind the barbecue grill. He fully intended to physically assault the helpless old man he thought I was. He raised his right fist high into the air, his eyes blazing with sheer hatred, preparing to deliver a devastating punch to my face. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I stood perfectly still, maintaining complete and total eye contact with the furious predator rushing blindly toward my space. I simply lowered my microphone and waited calmly for him to cross the invisible line I had established. He did not realize that I had anticipated every single move he would make tonight, including this pathetic display of physical aggression. His entire life was built on weak foundations of lies and cowardly actions. Now his desperate violence proved exactly how weak his corrupt character truly was deep inside his heart today. He thought he was closing in for an easy, satisfying act of brutal vengeance. He genuinely believed that his superior physical strength would somehow magically erase the devastating video evidence playing loudly behind him. He was completely unaware that he was charging blindly into a solid brick wall of extreme professional resistance. Every single step he took toward me merely cemented his upcoming permanent legal destruction. Brad closed the final few feet of distance, swinging his arm forward with maximum velocity, completely expecting my face to shatter upon impact. Before Brad could even complete his violent swing, two incredibly massive men seamlessly stepped right out from the dark shadows behind the catering tent. They were both dressed impeccably in crisp white waiter uniforms, blending perfectly into the beautiful upscale party environment all evening long. In reality, they were highly trained, elite undercover security professionals personally hired by my ruthless attorney, Eris Thorne, specifically for this exact moment tonight. The first guard moved with lightning speed, effortlessly catching his flying wrist in midair with a punishing, unbreakable grip. The sudden immense force instantly halted his forward momentum, violently jerking his entire body backward. Before the arrogant coward could even comprehend what was happening to him, the second massive guard expertly swept his legs right out from under him. Brad crashed down onto the hard stone patio with a heavy, sickening thud. The remaining breath violently left his lungs in a loud, pathetic wheeze as the two towering men forcefully rolled him straight over onto his stomach. They swiftly pinned both of his arms painfully behind his back, pressing his face firmly down into the wet, muddy grass at the edge of the patio stones. Brad squirmed desperately in the dirt, gasping for air and cursing loudly, completely humiliated in front of his elite social circle. "Do not move another single muscle right now, sir," the larger guard commanded in a deep, booming voice that echoed across the lawn. "You are being detained for attempting to assault the legal owner of this private estate." Mitchell and Brenda watched their precious son eat dirt, completely paralyzed by fear and profound public shame. I simply looked straight down at the pathetic man struggling hopelessly beneath the boots of my security team, feeling absolute, pure, unwavering peace wash completely over my entire soul tonight. The massive crowd parted in absolute silence as Aaliyah confidently stepped forward from the deep shadows near the edge of the sprawling lawn. She looked incredibly powerful and entirely liberated standing there under the bright patio lights. Without hesitation, she reached down and aggressively pulled the heavy diamond wedding ring right off her slender finger. She stared down at her treacherous husband writhing pathetically in the damp dirt. "The only truly stupid idiot here today is you, Brad," she declared coldly, her strong voice echoing loudly over the stunned audience. With a swift, powerful motion, Aaliyah threw the expensive diamond ring directly at his face. The solid metal band struck him forcefully right on his sweaty cheek, leaving a sharp red mark. Brad whimpered loudly, clutching his bruised face against the muddy grass. Suddenly, the loud, piercing wail of multiple police sirens began echoing heavily in the dark, distant background. The wailing police sirens grew louder, their flashing red and blue lights beginning to reflect off the tall trees surrounding my massive estate. Even with his face pushed firmly into the damp grass by my private security team, Brad refused to accept his total defeat. He thrashed his legs wildly against the stone patio, his expensive linen suit completely ruined by mud and spilled champagne. "You cannot do this to me," Brad shrieked, spitting dirt from his mouth as he struggled helplessly against the massive guards pinning his arms. "I have established legal tenant rights in this house. You are nothing but a pathetic, crazy old man, and you are going to pay dearly for this public assault." He twisted his neck, glaring up at me with eyes full of desperate, unhinged rage. "I am going to sue you for everything you own." "DeAndre," he screamed at the top of his lungs, his voice cracking with panic. "You illegally recorded us without our consent. I know the law. You cannot secretly film people inside a private residence and broadcast it to the entire world. I will drag you through civil court until you are entirely bankrupt and rotting on the streets. You are completely finished." I stood there looking down at his pathetic display of fake legal bravado, completely unmoved by his empty, desperate threats. Mitchell and Brenda watched their son screaming in the dirt, absolutely paralyzed by fear, unable to defend the ridiculous lies they had all built together. Brad genuinely believed he still possessed some form of upper hand, clinging desperately to his fake corporate superiority. He thought he was intimidating a clueless, uneducated mechanic. He was entirely unaware his pathetic legal threats were about to be utterly crushed by an absolute giant right here tonight, absolutely. Before Brad could scream another pathetic threat, the heavy iron front gates of my property swung wide open. Several uniformed police officers marched briskly down the gravel path, their heavy boots crunching loudly in the tense evening air. Flanking them in the very center was my formidable wealth manager and elite corporate attorney, Eris Thorne. He wore a razor-sharp, custom-tailored navy suit, clutching a thick leather briefcase that contained the absolute destruction of the Covington family. Eris walked directly onto the illuminated patio with the supreme, terrifying confidence of a great white shark detecting fresh blood in the water. He stared down at Brad, who was still squirming helplessly beneath my massive security guards. "You cannot sue a homeowner for having security cameras in his own living room," Eris stated coldly, his booming voice easily carrying across the sprawling lawn to reach every single horrified guest, especially when the incredibly foolish trespasser openly brags about committing multiple serious federal felonies directly into a high-definition recording device. Brad instantly stopped struggling. His wide, terrified eyes darted frantically from the stern police officers to the imposing, expensive lawyer standing tall above him. Eris slowly turned his back on the squirming man and faced the massive crowd of wealthy socialites, corporate executives, and local elites who had been completely frozen in utter shock. "Allow me to formally correct a very massive, deeply insulting misunderstanding that has taken place here tonight," Eris announced, projecting his voice with absolute authority. "You were all explicitly invited here to blindly celebrate a fake, fraudulent illusion carefully constructed by this pathetic man on the ground. Please allow me to formally introduce the actual, singular, and undisputed legal owner of this magnificent lakefront estate." Eris stepped gracefully aside, extending his arm respectfully toward me as I stood proudly in my simple, worn flannel shirt. "This is Mr. DeAndre Sullivan," Eris declared, his words striking the crowd like violent physical blows. "He is the brilliant original founder and sole owner of Sullivan Logistics, the largest privately held transportation and shipping empire on the entire East Coast. His fully verified personal net worth is easily 50 times that of every single person standing on this lawn combined. You are all trespassing on his private property right now." A collective deafening gasp echoed violently across the lush green grass. The wealthy guests stared at me in absolute mind-numbing disbelief, their jaws literally dropping open as the shocking, undeniable reality fully registered in their stunned minds. The poor, quiet black mechanic they had completely ignored, insulted, and ruthlessly dismissed all evening was actually an untouchable financial titan. The breathtaking scale of my true power was finally magnificently exposed tonight. The devastating truth hit the Covington family like an uncontrollable, catastrophic avalanche. Brad stopped breathing entirely, his lungs seizing up as the colossal magnitude of his profound error crushed his fragile, arrogant ego. The pathetic, helpless old mechanic he had openly mocked, belittled, and aggressively tried to evict from his own home was actually a fiercely powerful, completely untouchable billionaire titan. Brad realized with absolute horrifying clarity that he had not just poked a sleeping bear. He had foolishly walked straight into the dark den of an apex predator and handed him a loaded weapon. Mitchell physically staggered backward as if he had been brutally punched squarely in the chest. His eyes bulged out of his sweaty, pale face as he stared at my worn flannel shirt and muddy work boots. He finally understood why I never once raised my voice or lost my temper during their endless, disgusting insults. I never needed to shout because I already owned their entire pathetic existence. I was simply waiting patiently for the absolute perfect moment to violently destroy them. Brenda let out a weak, pathetic whimper, her hands violently shaking as she instinctively reached up to clutch the stolen vintage diamond necklace resting against her chest. The heavy jewelry she had so arrogantly paraded around my property now felt like a burning radioactive chain, securely fastened around her guilty neck. They had brazenly attempted to scam one of the wealthiest, most strategically brilliant businessmen in the entire state. The suffocating realization that their fake old money facade had been completely eviscerated by a self-made, vastly superior African-American entrepreneur broke their racist, entitled minds entirely tonight. They were absolutely ruined. Their fake empire was permanently destroyed right here in front of me tonight, leaving them completely and utterly defenseless forever now. The completely disgusted high society guests did not wait for another single second. They aggressively turned their backs on the shattered Covington family, muttering harsh, furious insults as they stormed rapidly across the pristine lawn. Women hiked up their expensive silk dresses, marching briskly toward their luxury vehicles parked in the long driveway, eager to escape the toxic radioactive fallout of this massive public disgrace. The elite crowd completely evaporated into the dark night, leaving the arrogant parasites entirely isolated and fully exposed. The two undercover security guards finally released their punishing grip, allowing Brad to slowly crawl up onto his knees in the muddy dirt. A stern, uniformed police officer immediately stepped forward, his expression completely devoid of any sympathy. He firmly handed Brad a thick, legally binding document stamped with a bright red seal. The final, spectacular phase of his absolute destruction had officially begun right now today. The stern police officer did not waste a single second looking at the pathetic man kneeling in the damp grass. He firmly pressed the thick legal document directly against Brad's trembling chest, forcing him to take it. This is a court-ordered emergency eviction notice and a formal criminal citation for severe trespassing, the officer announced, his deep voice slicing through the heavy night air with absolute authority. You and your parents have exactly 10 minutes to pack your personal belongings and vacate this private property entirely. If you are still standing on this estate when my watch hits 10 minutes, you will all be aggressively handcuffed, thrown into the back of my cruiser, and officially booked into the county jail tonight. Brad stared down at the bright red seal stamped onto the crisp white paper, completely unable to process the harsh, unforgiving reality of his sudden downfall. His hands shook violently as the heavy legal document rustled in his loose grip. He slowly turned his head to look at Mitchell and Brenda, who were standing totally paralyzed near the edge of the stone patio. The sheer panic rapidly settling into their widened eyes perfectly mirrored his own complete despair. "Move it right now," a second officer commanded sharply, resting his hand casually near his utility belt. "The clock is officially ticking." The terrifying reality of immediate arrest finally managed to penetrate Brad's thick, arrogant skull. He scrambled awkwardly to his feet, slipping twice in the slippery mud before breaking into a frantic, pathetic sprint toward the large front doors of my gorgeous lake house. Mitchell and Brenda quickly followed him, tripping over their expensive shoes as they rushed to collect their miserable belongings, before the aggressive police officers forcefully removed them from my own private property forever tonight immediately. While Brad and Mitchell frantically rushed inside to gather their few miserable possessions, Brenda remained frozen on the sprawling lawn. The sheer magnitude of their complete social ruin had utterly shattered her incredibly fragile ego. She stared wildly at the long line of expensive luxury vehicles slowly pulling away from my property, realizing her only potential lifelines were escaping rapidly into the dark night. Panic completely overrode any lingering shred of dignity she had left. Brenda kicked off her remaining designer shoe and sprinted barefoot across the damp gravel driveway, wildly waving her arms in the air like a totally unhinged lunatic. "Wait, please wait for me," she shrieked hysterically, chasing after a gleaming black Mercedes driving toward the main iron gates. She slammed her hands desperately against the tinted passenger window, her face contorted in sheer agony and absolute terror. "Susan, please open the door," Brenda sobbed loudly, pressing her sweaty cheek against the cold glass. "You know we are completely innocent. My horrible son lied to us too. Please, you have to give me a ride back to the city. I need a warm place to sleep just for tonight." The wealthy socialite sitting comfortably inside the luxurious vehicle did not even glance in her direction. Instead, Susan stared straight ahead with a look of pure disgust. The electric window rolled up, sealing the luxurious cabin tight and completely shutting out Brenda's pleas. The driver accelerated firmly, forcing Brenda to stumble backward into the messy gravel just to avoid being run over. She gasped for air, tears streaming uncontrollably down her ruined makeup, but she refused to give up her frantic begging. She turned around and aggressively threw herself toward a passing Range Rover, violently banging her fists against the sturdy hood. "Richard, please help us," she screamed, her voice cracking under the immense strain of her profound public humiliation. "We are entirely broke. We have absolutely nowhere else to go tonight. We are officially homeless." The executive behind the steering wheel scoffed loudly, shaking his head in sheer contempt before rolling up his window right in her weeping face. The message was devastating. They were now toxic pariahs, permanently exiled from the elite high society world they had so ruthlessly manipulated. Brenda sank slowly onto her knees in the dirty gravel, sobbing uncontrollably as the very last luxury car exited my gates, leaving her completely stranded, entirely friendless, and utterly destroyed by her own massive greed today. She hugged her knees tightly against her chest, shivering violently as the cold, terrifying realization of her extremely bleak future finally crashed heavily down upon her miserable existence tonight, forever leaving her weeping alone in the dark without any hope whatsoever. Exactly 10 minutes later, the heavy oak doors of my lake house swung open for the very last time. Brad, Mitchell, and Brenda emerged into the cool night air looking absolutely broken and entirely defeated. The two stern police officers walked closely behind them, maintaining a highly aggressive, deeply intimidating physical presence to ensure absolute compliance. Brad marched awkwardly in front of his custom white linen suit, now heavily stained with dark mud and green grass from his utterly humiliating public takedown. He tightly gripped the plastic handles of two massive designer suitcases, struggling pathetically to drag the heavy wheels across the uneven gravel driveway. Mitchell followed quietly right behind his ruined son, clutching a single overnight bag against his chest. His shoulders were slumped forward in total surrender, the arrogant swagger of his fake old money persona completely vanished into thin air. Brenda brought up the rear of the miserable procession, sniffling loudly while limping along on one bare foot. Her stolen vintage diamond necklace had been forcefully confiscated by Heiress Thorne before she was officially kicked out, leaving her neck completely bare and totally exposed. The long, grueling walk toward the main iron gates felt like an incredibly slow, torturous march of pure shame for the parasitic family. I stood silently on the stone patio alongside my brilliant daughter, watching their pathetic departure with immense, unwavering satisfaction. The heavy metal gates slowly creaked open, allowing the three disgraced individuals to step completely off my private property and directly out onto the dark, lonely public road. The police officers immediately slammed the gates firmly shut right behind them, loudly engaging the thick steel deadbolt. They were officially locked out of my beautiful sanctuary forever tonight, without any single chance to ever return inside again, absolutely for the rest of time. Standing outside the locked gates in the complete darkness, Brad aggressively dropped his heavy designer bags into the dirt. He angrily pulled a sleek, silver key fob from his ruined suit pocket and marched directly toward his gleaming black BMW parked on the street. Before he could even grasp the silver door handle, attorney Eris Thorne smoothly stepped entirely out of the shadows, physically blocking his path. Thorne folded his arms across his expensive tailored suit, staring down at the miserable, defeated man with absolute chilling authority. That expensive luxury car is legally registered entirely to Aaliyah Thorne, stated firmly, his booming voice echoing loudly into the cold night. You purchased it using her compromised financial credit. Step completely away from the vehicle immediately, Brad. You have absolutely no legal right to it. Brad froze in total despair. He was completely stranded, utterly penniless, and totally broken tonight without fail. Standing in the pitch-black shadows of the desolate county road, Brad frantically pulled his smartphone from his ruined linen jacket. His hands trembled violently as he swiped across the glowing screen, desperately opening his ride-sharing application to request an immediate escape from this total nightmare. He typed in the address of a downtown hotel, blindly hoping to hide his monumental failure from the rest of the world. He tapped the black button to confirm the premium ride using his digital wallet. A red exclamation point instantly flashed across his screen along with a sharp notification. Card declined. Brad gasped loudly, quickly selecting a different credit card linked to his wife's heavily abused account. He hit the button again, sweating profusely in the cool night air. Card declined. Panic fully set into his arrogant mind as he frantically switched to a third platinum card, praying for a tiny miracle. The screen flashed the exact same terrifying red message. His entire financial lifeline was completely severed. Aaliyah had flawlessly executed her absolute freeze on every single account he had maliciously drained. He stared at his useless device, the harsh realization hitting him like a speeding truck. He had no cash, no active credit, and no vehicle. He could not even afford a basic ride back into the city. Brenda wailed loudly behind him, demanding he call a luxury car service immediately. Brad slowly turned around to face his weeping mother, his eyes wide with unadulterated fear. We have absolutely nothing left, he whispered hoarsely, his voice cracking under the immense weight of his total ruin. We cannot even pay for a ride. They were completely stranded on the dark road, entirely stripped of the stolen wealth they had so arrogantly flaunted all night. His absolute destruction was perfectly finalized today. As Brad stared blankly at his dead smartphone in absolute disbelief, the heavy iron gates of my sprawling estate clicked loudly. Attorney Eris Thorne confidently strolled down the long gravel driveway, leaving the bright sanctuary of my property to approach the humiliated family standing miserably on the dirty roadside edge. He moved with the terrifying, unyielding grace of a highly trained corporate assassin closing in for the final killing strike tonight. Eris stopped directly in front of Mitchell, who was standing frozen next to his cheap overnight bag. Without displaying a single ounce of basic human sympathy, Eris extended his powerful hand and firmly pressed a thick, heavy manila folder squarely against Mitchell's chest. Mitchell flinched visibly, his trembling fingers instinctively wrapping around the stiff paper envelope, as if it were a highly venomous snake preparing to bite him. "What exactly is this document?" Mitchell stammered weakly, his voice barely rising above a pathetic, broken whisper. Eris adjusted his immaculate navy suit jacket and stared down at the older man with a cold, piercing gaze that offered absolutely zero mercy. "That folder contains the complete, undisputed legal documentation regarding your massive financial failures," Eris announced loudly, his voice echoing sharply into the dark night air. "Sullivan Limited Liability Corporation officially owns your entire $500,000 outstanding debt. You completely violated the primary terms of your original banking agreement, Mitchell. Therefore, we are aggressively foreclosing on absolutely all of your remaining physical and liquid assets immediately. Every single penny you still possess, every piece of property attached to your name, and any remaining credit you might try to claim has been entirely seized by my client's company. You do not simply owe money to a faceless banking institution anymore. You owe $500,000 directly to Mr. DeAndre Sullivan, the very same man you spent the entire evening viciously mocking and deeply disrespecting inside his own home." Mitchell staggered backward, his mouth hanging completely open as the catastrophic weight of Eris's booming words violently crushed his remaining spirit. He clutched the thick manila folder tightly against his rapidly beating heart, his eyes darting frantically back and forth between his weeping wife and his entirely useless, disgraced son. "You cannot possibly take everything we have left," Mitchell gasped, painfully struggling to draw enough breath into his tightening lungs. Aris offered him a chilling, predatory smile that fully cemented their absolute doom. "We already did take everything," Aris replied coldly. "You are completely bankrupted and officially destitute starting tonight forever and permanently without any mercy whatsoever from our powerful corporation today. Your entire fake empire is now utterly dead. Have a very miserable evening standing out here entirely alone forever." Mitchell let out a hollow, agonizing gasp as the sheer, suffocating truth of Aris's final statement completely pulverized his fragile reality. His legs suddenly lost all their strength, buckling violently beneath him as he dropped heavily onto the dusty gravel. He sank squarely onto his cheap overnight suitcase, his expensive loafers dragging through the wet mud. He clutched his chest tightly with both trembling hands, breathing in quick, frantic spurts while his vision blurred with overwhelming terror. The magnificent, highly curated illusion of their old money prestige was now completely and publicly eviscerated forever. They were no longer the proud, wealthy socialites, looking down their arrogant noses at everyone else from their non-existent pedestal. They were instantly officially homeless, stripped entirely bare of every single stolen luxury they had so desperately tried to flaunt. Brenda collapsed onto her bruised knees, right beside her broken husband, wrapping her arms around his shaking shoulders as she wept with loud, pathetic sobs that echoed miserably into the dark, indifferent night. The glorious, spectacular empire they had so viciously tried to steal from me had instantly turned into a permanent, inescapable financial prison of their very own making. They sat there in the dirt, completely surrounded by absolute nothingness, fully realizing they had absolutely zero friends, zero money, and zero future left to salvage today. Their profound, sickening greed had beautifully orchestrated their ultimate, inescapable doom tonight. Brad watched his devastated parents crumble into the muddy roadside gravel, his own cowardly heart pounding frantically inside his chest. He fully understood that his entire fake kingdom was utterly destroyed without any chance of a miraculous recovery happening tonight. The crushing gravity of his colossal failure forcefully pushed him directly toward his very last, desperate option for basic survival right here and right now, today, forever. Brad dropped to his muddy knees, violently sobbing as he slowly crawled back toward the towering iron gate. He peered through the thick metal bars, his face completely stained with dirt and pathetic, miserable tears. "Aaliyah, please," he begged frantically, his voice breaking into a loud, desperate wail. "I am so incredibly sorry for everything I did to you. Please give me one single second chance to fix this horrible mistake. I promise I will change my ways and be the perfect husband you truly deserve." Aaliyah stood perfectly still on the pristine side of the gate, looking down at his weeping, shattered form with absolute, unwavering disgust. She did not shed a single tear for him tonight. Instead, Aaliyah slowly reached into her designer purse with a completely cold, calculating glare. She firmly pulled out a crisp, deeply devastating legal document, preparing for his ultimate brutal ruin right now. Brad pressed his tear-stained face against the cold iron bars of the towering gate, gripping the metal so tightly his knuckles turned completely white. He looked up at Aaliyah with wide, desperate eyes, immediately launching into the exact same manipulative tactics he had used to control her for years. "Aaliyah, you have to understand my true intentions," he sobbed loudly, letting heavy tears stream down his cheeks to create a perfect mask of total devastation. "Everything I did, every single financial risk I took behind your back was entirely for us and our beautiful future together, always. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to build a magnificent kingdom for the children we always talked about having together. I wanted our family to have the absolute best life possible without struggling the way my parents did." He reached his muddy hand through the gap in the iron bars, frantically trying to grab the edge of her elegant dress. "I was under so much immense pressure to be the perfect provider for you, Brad," wailed, his voice cracking with rehearsed agony. "I made some terrible, misguided choices, but it was only because I loved you so intensely. Please do not throw away our entire marriage over a stupid mistake. We can go to counseling and completely rebuild our trust. I will spend the rest of my entire life making it up to you if you just open this gate and let me come home right now." He continued weeping loudly, waiting for her soft heart to finally crack under the heavy weight of his emotional blackmail. He genuinely thought his pathetic tears would instantly erase the massive destruction he had caused. He was incredibly and completely wrong today, right now, forever, without any single doubt. Aaliyah stood perfectly still on the manicured side of the heavy iron gate, completely unmoved by his pathetic theatrical display. She did not shed a single tear, nor did her expression soften even slightly. She stared down at the miserable kneeling man she had once called her loving husband, feeling nothing but disgust for his lies. "You did not steal my money to build a kingdom for our future children," Brad Aaliyah stated coldly, her voice slicing directly through the cool evening air like a perfectly honed surgical scalpel. "You stole my hard-earned salary to fund a fake, fraudulent lifestyle for your completely bankrupt parasitic parents. You happily drained my entire savings so you could proudly play the wealthy, successful financial executive while I worked myself to the absolute bone during exhausting night shifts at the downtown hospital." She slowly unclasped her expensive designer purse and pulled out a thick stack of binding documents secured tightly with a large metal clip. Without a single ounce of hesitation, she casually dropped the heavy papers right over the top of the iron gate. The bundle fell rapidly through the dark air, landing squarely in the wet mud directly at Brad's dirty knees. "Those are your official divorce papers," Aaliyah announced loudly, her tone completely devoid of any remaining affection. "I have already signed my portion. My brilliant attorney will ensure you leave this marriage with absolutely nothing but the clothing currently on your back." Brad stared blankly down at the divorce papers, his breath catching painfully in his tight throat. But as his trembling eyes scanned the very top page of the messy pile, he noticed a second, far more terrifying legal document firmly attached to the family court filings. It bore the unmistakable, terrifying seal of the state criminal court. Aaliyah watched his face drain of all remaining color as the horrific reality finally registered in his arrogant mind. "That second document is a formal criminal court summons," she continued mercilessly, her voice ringing with absolute, undeniable authority. "You are officially being indicted for severe felony identity theft and massive wire fraud. You deliberately forged my personal signature on multiple binding bank documents to illegally secure that $150,000 fraudulent loan. My legal team handed all the undeniable photographic evidence directly to the authorities earlier today. The police have a completely airtight case against you." Brad physically recoiled from the damp papers as if they were soaked in burning acid. His mouth opened and closed in rapid succession, but no actual sound managed to escape his painfully dry throat. The profound, catastrophic weight of his imminent destruction finally crashed completely over him forever today, perfectly now, absolutely. Brad remained kneeling in the wet gravel, utterly paralyzed by the monumental scale of his sudden downfall. He looked up at Aaliyah, his eyes wide and vacant, desperately searching her beautiful face for a single shred of the unconditional love he had so recklessly exploited for years. There was absolutely nothing left for him to manipulate anymore. Aaliyah took a deliberate step closer to the heavy iron gate, her posture completely rigid and intensely powerful. "You really thought you were the smartest person in the room, Brad," she declared, her voice echoing sharply against the dark trees. "You honestly believed you could effortlessly deceive an entire family, steal my hard-earned wealth, and silently strip my father of his magnificent estate without any consequences whatsoever. You played a very pathetic, incredibly foolish game against people who possess 10 times your actual intelligence." Brad violently shook his head back and forth, completely unable to form a single coherent sentence to defend his horrific, undeniable crimes. Aaliyah crossed her arms firmly over her chest, delivering the final devastating blow to his shattered reality. "You are not just losing your wife tonight, Brad," she stated with absolute terrifying clarity. "You are entirely losing your fundamental freedom. The state prosecutor has zero tolerance for aggressive wire fraud and malicious identity theft. You will spend the next several years locked securely inside a tiny concrete cell, wearing an orange jumpsuit instead of your custom linen suits. You will have plenty of miserable time to deeply reflect on how your disgusting, insatiable greed permanently destroyed your entire pathetic existence forever." Two heavily armed police officers immediately stepped forward from the dark shadows, roughly grabbing Brad by both of his trembling shoulders to pull him aggressively onto his muddy feet today, right now, without any fail, absolutely. The stern police officers swiftly twisted Brad's arms forcefully behind his back, locking heavy steel handcuffs securely around his muddy wrists. The sharp, metallic click of the restraints echoed loudly into the quiet summer night, sealing his permanent, inescapable doom. Brad finally broke down completely, sobbing uncontrollably as the aggressive officers marched him briskly toward the waiting patrol cruiser. They firmly shoved his ruined, humiliated body directly into the dark back seat, slamming the heavy door shut with absolute terrifying finality. Mitchell and Brenda stood completely frozen in the dirty roadside gravel, clutching their cheap suitcases in sheer, unadulterated terror. They wept loudly, watching helplessly as the flashing red and blue lights illuminated their disgraced son for the very last time today. The police cruiser rapidly accelerated down the dark, lonely highway, carrying their arrogant child straight to prison, leaving them entirely homeless, utterly penniless, and totally destroyed tonight forever. Exactly 1 week after the disastrous 4th of July party, the absolute destruction of the Covington family expanded far beyond the heavy iron gates of my private estate. One of the disgusted high society guests, completely appalled by the horrific racist comments and blatant criminal plotting they had witnessed on my giant projector screen, had secretly recorded the entire public spectacle on their smartphone. That highly damning footage was anonymously uploaded directly to multiple major social media platforms and prominent corporate message boards. It did not just simply circulate among local neighborhood gossip groups. The pristine 4K quality video went absolutely viral within 24 hours, spreading like an uncontrollable wildfire straight through Brad's elite financial circles. Every single major investment banker, hedge fund manager, and corporate executive in the entire metropolitan area watched the arrogant, supposedly brilliant finance manager loudly brag about committing massive felony wire fraud and viciously manipulating a helpless senior citizen. The sheer, unadulterated hubris displayed in the crisp night vision footage became the ultimate laughingstock of the corporate world. Eris Thorne called me early that morning, his voice rumbling with deep, predatory satisfaction, to report that the viral video had officially reached the top executives at Brad's prestigious financial firm. Brad had spent years meticulously cultivating a flawless, highly polished professional reputation, kissing up to the wealthiest partners and aggressively tearing down his co-workers to climb the corporate ladder. Now all that fake prestige was entirely vaporized. The digital footprint of his horrific crimes was permanently etched into the public internet forever. He could no longer hide behind his custom-tailored linen suits or his fake, charming smiles. The entire world now knew exactly what kind of ruthless, pathetic, greedy monster he truly was beneath the surface today, right now, without fail, absolutely forever. The devastating consequences of the leaked footage were incredibly swift and totally merciless for the disgraced son. The senior partners at Brad's elite finance firm did not simply ask for his quiet resignation behind closed doors. They wanted to aggressively distance themselves from his highly toxic, radioactive public image as rapidly as humanly possible. They formally terminated his lucrative employment contract, immediately issuing a harsh, highly visible press release condemning his severe ethical and criminal violations. His lucrative salary, his massive yearly bonuses, and his comprehensive corporate benefits were instantly canceled without any severance package or financial mercy whatsoever. Brad sat miserably inside a cold gray county holding cell, completely stripped of his arrogant pride, finally realizing that his entire professional career was completely destroyed permanently today. He was completely blacklisted from the entire financial sector entirely forever. Meanwhile, the harsh reality of absolute poverty aggressively slammed into his deeply entitled parents. Without Brad's stolen money to blindly fund their fake high society lifestyle, Mitchell and Brenda Covington were violently thrown out into the cold, unforgiving street. Because my corporate holding company had legally seized absolutely every single penny of their remaining liquid assets, they had absolutely zero options left to survive. The incredibly proud racist couple who had boldly mocked my beautiful home were officially forced to pack their few remaining cheap belongings and move directly into a filthy, rundown roadside motel located on the dangerous outskirts of the city. Their tiny, miserable room smelled heavily of stale cigarette smoke and damp, rotting mildew. The harsh neon lights flickering outside their dirty window served as a constant, aggressive reminder of their profound, inescapable downfall. They were completely reliant on pathetic, minimal unemployment checks just to buy cheap canned food to survive each long week. Brenda, who had strutted proudly across my manicured lawn wearing my stolen diamonds, now wept bitterly on a stained, lumpy mattress every single night. Mitchell sat quietly in the dark corner, completely broken and entirely unable to provide for his weeping wife. They had viciously plotted to steal my hard-earned sanctuary and casually toss me onto the street like disposable garbage without any hesitation. Now the heavy, unforgiving hammer of divine karma had forcefully smashed their fake kingdom into tiny, worthless pieces. They were completely drowning in the absolute miserable poverty they so deeply despised, entirely isolated from the wealthy world they had sacrificed everything to falsely inhabit. Their sheer unadulterated suffering was perfectly executed today, leaving them completely ruined entirely, friendless, and permanently destitute forever, without any hope for redemption or escape from their miserable new life, tonight right here in this horrible, disgusting, dark, and extremely lonely motel room forever today now. The devastating social exile of the Covington family was remarkably absolute and flawlessly executed by the angry high society community. Just 48 hours after their humiliating public expulsion from my beautiful lakefront estate, the prestigious City Country Club took swift, incredibly harsh administrative action against them. The wealthy board of directors called an emergency evening meeting specifically to address the viral security footage that completely exposed their massive fraudulent behavior. They formally and permanently revoked Mitchell and Brenda's highly coveted gold tier membership without offering a single penny of any refunded annual dues. An official, brutally worded termination letter was aggressively hand-delivered directly to their filthy motel room door, firmly banning them from ever stepping foot on the manicured golf courses or dining in the exclusive club restaurants again. They instantly became completely radioactive social pariahs within their own beloved city. Their former wealthy friends, the exact same snobby people they had desperately tried to impress by illegally utilizing my hard-earned property, aggressively blocked all their desperate phone calls and completely ignored their pathetic weeping text messages. When Brenda bravely attempted to walk into her favorite upscale boutique downtown to desperately return an expensive silk dress for quick cash, the stern store manager loudly ordered her to leave the premises immediately or face security. Everywhere they went, people recognized their disgraced faces from the viral internet video. They were relentlessly mocked in the local grocery aisles and actively shunned on the public sidewalks. The massive, beautiful empire of lies they had meticulously constructed over decades was totally reduced to absolutely nothing but deep public shame. They had aggressively dug a massive, inescapably dark social grave, and now they were permanently forced to live inside it forever today. Perfectly right now, absolutely forever, without any mercy whatsoever today. I sat comfortably on my spacious wooden porch, completely relaxing in my favorite armchair as the early morning sun rose beautifully over the shimmering lake. I took a long, deeply satisfying sip of my hot black coffee, relishing the absolute uninterrupted peace that had finally returned to my magnificent home. The air felt incredibly fresh, totally cleansed of the toxic, arrogant presence that had so foolishly tried to ruin my quiet retirement. I calmly unfolded my crisp copy of the prestigious Financial Times, smiling broadly as a prominent headline immediately caught my eye today right now. The detailed article prominently announced the highly anticipated upcoming criminal court date for a previously disgraced, formerly fired corporate finance manager facing severe, massive felony identity theft charges. The spectacular final act of Brad's complete and utter legal destruction was officially set to begin very soon, perfectly concluding our ultimate justice absolutely forever today. The heavily air-conditioned courtroom felt completely suffocating as the high-profile felony fraud hearing officially commenced early that Tuesday morning. I sat quietly in the back row alongside my brilliant daughter Aaliyah and our fierce attorney Eris Thorne, watching the absolute destruction of the Covington family reach its miserable climax. Brad sat rigidly at the defense table wearing a cheap, poorly fitted gray suit that completely highlighted his steep, humiliating fall from corporate grace. He looked incredibly pale, sweating profusely under the bright fluorescent lights as he faced the very real, terrifying prospect of a maximum 20-year federal prison sentence for aggravated identity theft and massive wire fraud. When the stern state prosecutor finally called him to the witness stand, Brad completely abandoned any remaining shred of family loyalty or basic human decency. In a desperate, pathetic attempt to secure a significantly reduced plea deal, the cowardly man aggressively turned on his own flesh and blood without a single ounce of hesitation. He raised his trembling right hand, swore a binding oath to tell the absolute truth, and immediately pointed a shaking finger directly at his horrified parents sitting in the gallery. Brad loudly testified that Mitchell and Brenda had ruthlessly masterminded the entire fraudulent financial plot from the very beginning. He desperately claimed they had aggressively manipulated his intense desire for parental approval, actively forcing him to secretly forge Aaliyah's signature on the loan documents to save them from their own massive bankruptcy. He painted himself as a naive, helpless victim, entirely controlled by their relentless, greedy demands for luxury. He aggressively threw his own mother and father completely under the speeding bus today to simply save his own pathetic skin right now in this public courtroom forever, perfectly, without fail today, right here, now, absolutely forever. The sheer audacity of Brad's sworn testimony immediately triggered an explosive, entirely unhinged reaction from the public viewing gallery. Mitchell Covington violently leaped out of his heavy wooden chair, his face contorted into a hideous mask of pure, unadulterated fury. His cheeks flushed a violent shade of dark crimson as he pointed an aggressive, trembling finger directly at the witness stand. "You absolute miserable coward!" Mitchell screamed at the absolute top of his lungs, completely disregarding the strict decorum of the formal federal courtroom. "You ruined our entire family with your pathetic, uncontrollable greed, and now you have the sheer audacity to blame us for your massive, disgusting criminal actions." The heavy wooden gavel slammed down violently, echoing sharply across the vast room as the stern judge demanded immediate silence. But the shattered Covington family was entirely beyond any form of rational control. Brenda collapsed heavily onto the wooden bench, weeping with loud, hysterical, and incredibly pathetic sobs that filled the tense air. She aggressively pointed her hands toward her disgraced son, completely tearing apart the very last remaining shreds of their fake old money facade right there in front of the highly disgusted legal audience. "You selfish, horrible monster!" Brenda shrieked wildly, tears ruining her cheap makeup and streaming down her miserable face. "We never told you to forge her signature. You stole that massive amount of money because you wanted to pretend you were a highly successful financial genius. You destroyed our entire lives because of your own massive, pathetic ego today." The courtroom erupted into chaotic, deafening murmurs as the deeply fractured family actively tore each other to tiny pieces in front of the incredibly stunned judge. Brad yelled violently right back at his screaming parents from the elevated witness stand, aggressively denying their furious accusations while frantically attempting to justify his catastrophic felony crimes. He blamed his father for raising him to blindly worship money and aggressively attacked his mother for her endless, incredibly toxic materialistic demands. They completely eviscerated each other publicly, hurling vicious, dark family secrets and deeply toxic insults across the large formal room. The massive, beautiful empire of lies they had meticulously constructed over decades was totally reduced to absolutely nothing but deep public shame and incredibly loud, aggressive shouting. I sat quietly next to Aaliyah, watching the glorious, spectacularly chaotic implosion unfold beautifully right before our very eyes. They were finally serving as their own executioners, permanently dismantling their toxic parasitic bond in a completely savage, unforgiving display of pure, absolute desperation and total moral collapse, perfectly executing their total ruin forever today, right here and now in front of everyone, absolutely without any fail forever today, right here now, exactly. After the violent, incredibly loud family meltdown was finally brought under strict control by the armed courtroom bailiffs, the stern federal judge firmly adjusted his dark robes and prepared to deliver his final, devastating ruling. The entire courtroom held its collective breath as the heavy silence quickly returned. Mr. Covington, the highly respected judge, began his deep voice slicing directly through the thick, tense air with absolute, uncompromising legal authority. "You have systematically orchestrated an incredibly malicious, highly calculated campaign of aggressive wire fraud, severe identity theft, and profound financial domestic abuse against your own wife. The extensive, perfectly documented evidence provided by the plaintiff's elite legal team is completely undeniable and absolutely overwhelming." The stern judge aggressively pounded his heavy wooden gavel onto the polished desk, formally sealing Brad's permanent, inescapable doom today. "I am officially ruling that Dr. Aaliyah Sullivan holds absolutely zero legal or financial liability for the massive fraudulent debt you secretly accumulated under her stolen identity. Furthermore, I am directly sentencing you to 3 consecutive years of incredibly heavy, highly restrictive criminal probation. You are legally ordered to pay massive, complete financial restitution to the primary victim, and you will immediately complete 1,000 hours of grueling, intense, physical community service under strict state supervision. You will spend the next several years relentlessly paying for your disgusting, pathetic, and entirely unforgivable crimes against this brilliant, innocent woman. If you violate a single tiny condition of this exceptionally strict probationary sentence, you will instantly be thrown directly into a maximum security federal penitentiary to finish your long sentence. Brad slowly lowered his pale, sweating face directly into his trembling, handcuffed hands, sobbing quietly as the absolute crushing weight of his monumental permanent failure completely washed over his shattered, miserable soul forever perfectly tonight, right now, today. With the magnificent legal victory officially finalized and fully cemented into the public record forever, Aaliyah confidently stood up from her wooden chair and gracefully exited the large federal courthouse without ever looking back at her ruined, weeping former husband. I proudly walked right beside my brilliant, fiercely strong daughter as we pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped directly out into the bright, warm afternoon sunlight today. She took a remarkably deep, long breath of the crisp, fresh city air, feeling the massive, suffocating weight of her toxic, fraudulent marriage finally lift entirely off her capable shoulders. She was completely unburdened, entirely debt-free, and officially standing as an absolutely independent, highly victorious woman ready to reclaim her entire glorious future. We smiled together warmly, fully prepared to embark on a beautiful new beginning, far away from their pathetic, greedy parasites, forever perfectly right now, today, absolutely always. Aaliyah packed her remaining personal belongings into 2 sleek leather travel bags and officially moved into my peaceful lake house the very next morning. The stunning waterfront estate immediately became her absolute private sanctuary for profound emotional healing. For the first 2 quiet weeks, she spent most of her free time resting on the spacious cedar deck, watching the calm blue water ripple gently beneath the warm summer breeze. The heavy, exhausting toll of her brutally toxic marriage slowly began to wash completely away from her tired soul. One quiet Tuesday evening, we sat together near the large stone fire pit, watching the orange flames crackle brightly into the dark night sky. Aaliyah stared intently at the burning wood, wrapping a thick wool blanket tightly around her shoulders. "Dad, I feel so incredibly stupid," she whispered softly, her voice cracking with deep, lingering shame. "I am an educated, highly trained surgical resident who makes life-or-death medical decisions every single day. How could I possibly let a pathetic, greedy man blindly manipulate my entire existence? For years, I gave him absolute control over my hard-earned finances just because I foolishly believed he genuinely loved me. It is incredibly humiliating to realize I was nothing but a convenient, disposable bank account for his arrogant family to eagerly drain." I listened quietly, understanding the immense pain deeply rooted inside her heavy heart. The betrayal cut incredibly deep, slicing through her brilliant, logical mind and attacking her raw, vulnerable emotions. She needed to verbally purge the heavy, sickening guilt she had carried entirely alone for so long. She was mourning the profound loss of her own innocent trust, fiercely angry at herself for blindly loving a ruthless, parasitic monster, masquerading perfectly as her devoted husband. I remained perfectly quiet, listening intently. The very next morning, I gently woke Aaliyah up just before the bright golden sun peeked entirely over the distant tree line. I handed her a hot travel mug filled completely with fresh black coffee and led her directly out onto my long wooden fishing dock. I handed her my favorite vintage fishing rod, the exact same heavy fiberglass pole I used to teach her how to cast when she was just a tiny, eager child. We stood side by side in the cool, refreshing morning mist, listening to the gentle water lapping softly against the thick wooden pylons supporting our weight. I showed her exactly how to securely hook the squirming bait, my calloused fingers guiding her smaller, delicate hands with precise, practiced movements. I instructed her to cast the heavy line straight out into the deep, dark green water. The silver metal hook sailed beautifully through the cool morning air, landing perfectly with a tiny, satisfying splash directly into the calm lake surface. We waited patiently in the profound silence, letting the peaceful nature slowly repair her deeply fractured spirit today. Aaliyah gripped the cork handle incredibly tight, her knuckles turning pale as she anxiously stared at the small red and white plastic bobber floating gently on the cold water. She finally let out a long, heavy breath, releasing the immense physical tension securely locked inside her tired shoulders. "Dad, I am so terrified that I will never actually be able to trust my own judgment ever again," Aaliyah whispered softly, keeping her dark eyes fixed firmly on the bobbing red lure. I thought I was an incredibly smart, highly capable woman, but I was completely fooled by a common, pathetic scammer. I gently placed my heavy hand warmly onto her tense right shoulder. I looked directly into her beautiful brown eyes, my expression projecting absolute unwavering paternal strength. I smiled softly, wanting her to deeply understand my next words, forever. Being smart is not about never being conned. Aaliyah, I stated firmly, my deep voice cutting cleanly through the quiet morning mist perfectly right now. Every single person makes horrible, blinding mistakes when they fall deeply in love. True brilliance is about knowing exactly how to strike back flawlessly when you are finally betrayed. You did not just survive his vicious, cowardly attack, my beautiful daughter. You strategically dismantled his entire fake kingdom, secured your own massive financial freedom, and completely ruined his pathetic, arrogant life forever. You struck back with absolute flawless precision, protecting yourself perfectly from his extreme greed and saving your bright future entirely without any regret, proving exactly how incredibly powerful you genuinely are deep inside your strong, beautiful heart today and absolutely always. Aaliyah fiercely channeled all her lingering emotional pain directly into her demanding medical career. She returned to the bustling downtown hospital with a renewed, unbreakable focus, dedicating every single waking hour to saving lives and perfecting her incredibly complex surgical skills. Without the exhausting, toxic presence of her manipulative former husband constantly draining her energy and stealing her hard-earned money, her professional brilliance truly began to shine brighter than ever before. Her relentless dedication and unparalleled talent did not go completely unnoticed by the hospital administration board. Just 6 short months after her spectacular divorce was officially finalized, Aaliyah was unanimously promoted to the highly prestigious position of Chief of Surgery. She stood proudly before her colleagues, accepting the massive promotion with profound grace, true humility, and absolute unwavering confidence. But her incredible personal comeback did not stop entirely with her own magnificent career advancement today. Aaliyah deeply understood exactly how terrifying it felt to be completely trapped and financially exploited by a vicious romantic predator. Utilizing a significant portion of the massive personal wealth she had successfully protected inside her blind trust, she officially established a powerful new nonprofit foundation. She specifically designed the robust organization to provide free elite legal counsel, emergency housing, and comprehensive financial literacy training to innocent victims suffering silently from severe financial domestic abuse. She hired a dedicated team of aggressive lawyers and skilled accountants to aggressively fight for women who had been maliciously stripped of their own financial independence. Aaliyah took her deepest, darkest personal trauma and brilliantly transformed it into a glowing, impenetrable beacon of absolute hope, perfectly ensuring that no other innocent woman would ever have to face that terrifying, suffocating darkness completely alone without any help whatsoever today, permanently saving their bright futures forever, absolutely safely and always. Later that same evening, Aaliyah and I sat down together at my heavy oak dining table to share a wonderfully peaceful, incredibly joyous dinner. We ate perfectly grilled steaks and laughed freely, our joyful voices echoing warmly throughout the beautiful, quiet house. Every single trace of the suffocating, arrogant toxicity that Brad and his miserable parents had aggressively brought into our sanctuary was entirely flushed from our happy lives forever. The heavy, dark storm had officially passed, leaving behind nothing but bright, unbroken skies and a profoundly beautiful, entirely secure future for both of us to genuinely enjoy together. We toasted our absolute victory with a glass of crisp, refreshing, sparkling water, feeling entirely renewed and completely liberated today. But despite our beautiful, flawless triumph, one final, incredibly satisfying encounter still remained absolutely necessary to perfectly conclude our ultimate justice forever, right before my very own watchful eyes early tomorrow. Exactly 1 entire year had passed since the glorious 4th of July party that permanently ended the toxic Covington family reign. I was driving my trusty, beat-up Ford pickup truck down the long, winding highway, heading straight toward the local tackle shop to buy some fresh live fishing bait. The mid-July afternoon was incredibly oppressive, with the blistering hot summer sun beating down mercilessly against the cracked asphalt. Heat waves aggressively radiated off the black pavement, making the distant horizon look like a shimmering mirage of wavy, distorted lines. I rolled my windows completely down, letting the thick, humid air blow fiercely through the spacious cabin of my old, reliable vehicle. I felt absolutely incredible today, completely unbothered by the intense, sweltering temperatures baking the rural county landscape outside my open windows. Life at my beautiful lake house had been utterly perfect, filled with quiet fishing mornings, deep laughter, and peaceful family dinners with my brilliant, highly successful daughter. I was simply a happy, retired African-American man enjoying the simple, honest rewards of a lifetime of grueling, relentless hard work and massive corporate success. My heavy mud-terrain tires rumbled loudly against the uneven road as I navigated the familiar route I had taken hundreds of times before without any incident. The fuel gauge on my dashboard suddenly dipped low, flashing a bright yellow warning light directly into my eyes. I gently tapped the heavy brakes, slowing my old truck down to safely exit the main highway. I steered my heavy vehicle firmly toward a small, incredibly busy roadside gas station positioned right on the dusty corner of the busy intersection. I truly had absolutely no idea that this brief, mundane pit stop would beautifully conclude the greatest, most satisfying victory of my entire long life today. I firmly parked my heavy truck securely beside the rusted metal fuel pump and stepped directly out into the suffocating, sweltering afternoon heat. The intense humidity aggressively wrapped tightly around my entire body, like a thick, heavy wool blanket instantly. I slammed the heavy driver door shut and walked briskly toward the dingy convenience store entrance, eager to purchase an ice-cold beverage and swiftly pay for my expensive gasoline. As I approached the dirty glass double doors, a sudden burst of bright neon color quickly caught my sharp attention near the dusty edge of the concrete parking lot. A solitary man was working tirelessly in the blistering heat, wearing a highly visible, incredibly bright orange community service vest stretched tightly across his deeply slumped, exhausted shoulders. He was brutally sweating profusely under the unforgiving summer sun, his face completely flushed, a dangerous, bright crimson red from the sheer physical exertion of his grueling court-ordered outdoor labor today. He was awkwardly clutching a cheap plastic grabber tool in his blistered right hand, desperately stabbing at filthy, discarded fast food wrappers, crushed soda cans, and rotting cigarette butts scattered carelessly across the dirty, oil-stained concrete pavement. He forcefully tossed the collected roadside garbage directly into a heavy, dark black plastic trash bag dragging clumsily behind him. He looked utterly miserable, utterly defeated, and entirely stripped of any remaining human dignity as he manually scrubbed the filthy public street. I completely froze in my tracks, my eyes narrowing sharply as I quickly recognized the familiar, pathetic slouch of the miserable worker suffering right in front of me. I took 3 slow, deliberate steps closer, letting my eyes fully process the spectacular reality unfolding perfectly before my very own vision. The extremely miserable, thoroughly humiliated man painfully picking up filthy garbage from the disgusting gas station pavement was none other than Brad Covington. His previously immaculate custom-tailored white linen suits and expensive leather loafers were now entirely replaced by deeply stained denim jeans and cheap, completely ruined work boots covered thickly in foul-smelling mud. His arrogant, perfectly styled hair was currently plastered flat against his sweaty, sunburned forehead in a deeply pathetic, greasy mess. He dragged his heavy trash bag slowly across the burning concrete, looking absolutely broken, completely penniless, and totally devoid of his former elite corporate prestige. The incredibly harsh, thoroughly unforgiving reality of divine karma had forcefully slammed directly into his arrogant face with catastrophic, unyielding power today. He was physically paying the ultimate miserable price for his disgusting, malicious greed and his relentless, cruel financial abuse against my brilliant daughter right here in the hot, blazing afternoon sun today, forever, without any mercy, absolutely whatsoever. I calmly turned away from the deeply pathetic sight and walked directly into the heavily air-conditioned convenience store. I smoothly grabbed 2 large, ice-cold bottles of purified spring water from the glowing refrigerated display case, proudly paying the friendly cashier with a crisp $20 bill today. I carefully kept 1 freezing bottle firmly in my right hand and carried the second bottle securely in my left as I exited the cool building, stepping right back into the brutal, suffocating wall of pure outdoor heat. I walked slowly and deliberately across the cracked concrete parking lot, my heavy work boots crunching loudly against the loose gravel and dried dirt. I approached the hunched, sweating figure of the entirely disgraced man continuing his miserable, degrading physical labor. Brad was fiercely struggling to pick up a filthy, flattened cardboard cup, his blistered hands shaking violently under the immense, grueling strain of his court-ordered punishment. I stepped quietly into his direct line of sight, allowing my tall, broad shadow to fall completely over his kneeling, exhausted body. Without uttering a single word, I slowly crouched down and gently placed one of the ice-cold water bottles directly onto the hot concrete curb right beside his muddy, ruined boots. Brad completely froze, his heavy plastic grabber tool slipping right out of his trembling fingers and clattering loudly onto the dirty pavement. He slowly lifted his head, his chest heaving with deep, ragged gasps for precious air. When his bloodshot, terrified eyes finally met my calm, unyielding gaze, his sweaty face turned a violent shade of crimson red with sheer, absolute, and total public humiliation. He opened his dry, cracked lips to speak, but absolute paralyzing shame instantly crushed his fragile vocal cords, rendering him completely, entirely, absolutely, and permanently speechless today. I did not gloat over his pathetic downfall. I did not shout angrily or hurl any vicious insults at the broken man kneeling helplessly in the dirty gravel. I simply stood incredibly tall, looking directly down into his miserable, weeping eyes with absolute profound tranquility filling my entire soul. Sometimes, before you can ever truly appreciate the magnificent value of a beautiful private estate, you first have to brutally learn exactly how to pick up disgusting trash on the public street. I stated calmly, my deep voice perfectly steady and undeniably powerful. I turned my back on his shattered existence, climbed comfortably into my reliable old truck, and started the heavy engine. I proudly drove away toward my incredibly peaceful, beautiful, shimmering lake house, leaving Brad completely and hopelessly trapped forever in the sweltering afternoon heat, to silently suffer his agonizing eternal regret, completely alone, forever, perfectly, today, absolutely always. If you enjoyed this story, please like, subscribe, and share your own personal experiences down in the comments.